for only some of its precincts. We're going to get you caught up on all of this. Thanks for joining us for this special coverage of Georgia's primary election. I'm Sean Gables.
And I'm Rick Fulbaum, and we're so glad you've joined us for this important night tonight. We've got team coverage with reporters and political experts breaking down all of the races and the results as they come in, the polling problems across the state that we've seen, and unfortunately there have been a lot. Tonight, the Secretary of State is launching an investigation into precinct problems across Atlanta, and many of those problems happening in Fulton County. County election officials are planning a news conference, a virtual news conference starting at 7:15. And as you can see, CBS 46's Carolyn Ryan is live there tonight at Bunch Middle School, breaking down today's voting issues. Carolyn.
Hi, Rick. Yeah, this is actually one of the largest precincts in Fulton County, but you can see it's awfully quiet here. Come on in with me. I want to walk for a moment, if I can, and just show you what it looks like inside. You can literally walk right in. Nobody's in line here. And you can snake around and make your way right in and get inside and get started. Now, people are telling me that they're getting in and out in 15 minutes or less. Now, earlier today, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms tweeted that voters here were saying that none of the machines were working. So we took that concern directly to the man who oversaw the rollout of these new voting machines. His name's Gabriel Sterling. He's with the Secretary of State's office. We asked him, is there a problem with these voting machines? Are they malfunctioning, as the mayors and others have tweeted? And he said emphatically no. He said the machines have been tested by the state and by the counties. He said the machines have been used already in early voting with no problems. He said the problem today was with human error at the individual polling precincts. Take a listen.
The main part of the issues we've run into and been able to see so far is really a question of poll worker training. The equipment itself is functioning. In 150 counties, everything's going relatively well. There have been some things with, like, somebody forgot a code. They plugged in the BMDs the wrong way into their battery backups. Things like that are really training issues more than anything, but not the equipment itself.
Now, Sterling said that he is monitoring all the problems coming in today, and that as soon as they get a report, they send a technician out to troubleshoot. He said 100% of the time it was an error made by a poll worker or somebody who just hadn't been properly trained. And after a simple explanation, he said slowly polling precincts were getting back up and running. And he said lines have been slowly dwindling since that point. And that is clearly evidenced by what we're seeing here at Ralph Bunch, a polling precinct in Fulton County. There's no lines here and no problems at this hour. And now it's also clear that a battle is brewing between the state and the county, specifically DeKalb County and Fulton County. We know the state has been saying that it was an issue with the counties not properly training the poll workers, and then the county also firing back and saying that it was perhaps the machines. We are going to know more at 7:15, just a few minutes. Fulton County is actually going to hold a virtual press conference, as you mentioned, Rick, where they're hopefully going to address some of these concerns. We're going to hear directly from them. We'll bring that to you, but certainly something brewing here between one pointing fingers at the other. We're just trying to get to the bottom of it, but the polls have been extended now here in Fulton County until 9 o'clock. And so if you're at home and you're watching and you've been hesitant to come out to the polls to vote because you've seen all these long lines, know that here there are no long lines. And I'll make one final note. There was an individual I ran into who had just got done voting here, and she said this is not her precinct. She said she was at another precinct, which was she was assigned to, and she said the line was very long. It snaked around the block, so she tried her hand and she came here, and they allowed her to vote here. So keep that in mind as well. Rick, back to you.
All right, Carolyn Ryan at a place where there is no line in Fulton County. If, as she said, you were one of those who had some problems voting earlier and may have given up, it might be a good idea to go back now. You have a couple of hours, a little under 2 hours until the polls close in Fulton County. All right, Carolyn, we'll see you in a little bit. Thanks so much.
You know, Rick, the Georgia NAACP is calling for immediate action for the failure of this election and pointing fingers at the Secretary of State. So the story is unfolding as we speak. Meanwhile, strong words today from Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. He is blaming, as we just heard in that report, Fulton County's election officials for today's missteps.
just totally disorganized mess. They had 3 additional months to get ready for this. They've had those machines for 6 months now in their storage warehouses. They could have gone out and trained their employees, trained their precinct workers. And what did they do? They squandered that time.
Fulton County not the only place seeing issues. Cobb County government officials say dozens of their precincts will remain open until 8 tonight. Many polling places like this one in Austell had lines wrapped around the parking lot. We're told many of the precincts opened late this morning. Let's go straight to CBS 46's Alicia Roberts. Alicia, you're in Austell right now with more on the issues in Cobb County.
Yeah, that's right. And conditions continue to deteriorate. It is pouring right now. We just saw a bolt of lightning in the area. Lines have been long all day. 19 precincts here in Cobb County are going to be staying open 1 hour late. These folks in line right now have already been waiting for an hour. There is at least a couple of hours ahead of them. And take a look at how long this line wraps around. Folks coming ready, though. They've got their ponchos, they've got their umbrellas, volunteers on hand handing out bottles of water throughout the day to make the wait possible. Voters were told to bring their masks and also pack their patience. They are going to need it here. I want to talk to some of those waiting in line, including David over here. Put my umbrella down. David, how are you? You're out to vote today. Tell me how long you've been in line so far.
2.5 hours.
2.5 hours you've been waiting in line. What time did you get here today?
I'm not really sure of the time, but about 2.5 hours,
Do you know how much longer you're going to have to wait in line?
Probably another hour, what they say.
Okay. Tell me, have you voted at this location before?
All the time, yes, I have.
So this is your voting location. Is this normal?
No. There's a lot of people out today.
What do you attribute that to? Why the long line?
Everything's going on in the world today, with the unrest, just the protests, just everything,
So, in your mind, the long lines are a good thing in some ways.
Look, I'm from Mississippi, and folks die for this right that I'm going, so I would never take advantage of it, so I'm here for the long haul.
Now, we're pressing Cobb County officials for answers about these long lines. They told voters to anticipate long lines. Is 2.5 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, is that reasonable, though, in your mind, David?
It's worth the wait. It's worth the wait.
What do you say to anybody else coming out here tonight to vote?
Come vote. Catch a vote. It's very important.
So long lines not deterring you?
Not at all.
David, thank you. Good luck to you as you wait in line. Let's go talk to some other folks here waiting in line, waiting in the rain, as you can see here. And these lines are extensive. These folks have been out. Ladies, how long have you been out so far today?
I think it's been the last 35 minutes.
35 minutes here. The rain not deterring you?
No, it's not. I think this is what I need to do. I need to get out and definitely vote today.
And you're wearing a mask. This is still technically a pandemic that we are in. Did you worry today potentially about social distancing during the...
I did, but I think my duty to come out and vote, I'm going to hopefully I'm covered with my mask so that I'll be protected, yes.
Have you voted at this location before?
Yes.
Are these lines longer than what you've seen?
Much longer.
What do you say to county officials? We've got a November election coming up.
We need to do better. We need to expand this, either this, the location where we are right now, or open up more opportunities, more locations for the people in this district to be able to vote.
And tell me your name, please.
Rukia.
Thank you so much for talking to us. These are just some of the voters braving the elements tonight. Here it is pouring in Austell. Again, 19 precincts open 1 hour longer. So if you get in line by 8 o'clock tonight, your vote will be counted. And these folks not deterred right now by some unfavorable conditions to make sure their vote counts. We'll send it back to you guys inside.
All right, Alicia, thanks very much. Well, we have two great political analysts who are going to be joining us all night long. We are so excited to have them to pick their brains. Elena Rains and Carly Swift. Elena is the founder of Lead to Achieve. That's a public affairs campaign strategy and education consulting firm.
And Carly is a political strategist, attorney, and community advocate, currently serving on corporate counsel for a Fortune 500 company. We're glad to have both of you today. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Elena, we're going to start with you. What have you heard about the voting problems today that you find particularly troublesome? I've been monitoring social media. Former Mayor Kasim Reed calls it basically voter suppression. The Atlanta mayor, current mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, obviously very upset about it, calling on the Secretary of State to do something. And then you have the NAACP threatening litigation.
Yeah. So, I mean,
It's no secret that this has been an ongoing issue. And it boils down to lack of leadership at the state level. This year, it's more voters, longer lines, fewer polling sites. In 2018, it was the Secretary of State presiding over his own election. We need accountability and we need transparency. I just believe organizations like Fair Fight and New Georgia Project, they only exist to protect the right of voters because the state is not doing it.
Carly, let me ask you your take on some of these issues that we have seen early today. And we're going to have a press conference from Fulton County officials in just a couple of minutes from now that we'll carry live. But how concerning do you think that these issues are as we head into the evening hours of this primary day?
Yeah, I think that these issues, it concerns me because, as Elena mentioned, they're not new. And the problem that I'm seeing is that instead of the leadership actually acknowledging the problems from the state leadership all the way down to county leadership, acknowledging those problems and working together to resolve them. That's really the only way that we're going to move forward. And so it's really important that our leaders work together, because voting should not be a partisan issue. And that's what it appears that they are doing so far. They're turning this into a partisan debate about who was wrong rather than how can we make sure that all voters have access and are able to vote.
Elena, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here. It's no secret that Fulton County has a history of very similar problems happening in prior elections. Again, there were finger pointing then with the AGALC, also the NAACP, also nonprofit organizations. They've all pointed fingers at the Secretary of State, but critics are saying, and we just heard from one of our earlier reports with Carolyn Ryan, is that the Secretary of State's office is saying, we provided the equipment. It is your responsibility to train and help these employees or the poll workers be able to work those machines so there aren't those problems. And knowing the history of Fulton County, the question is, if there is a history of this, at what point does it get fixed?
That's a great question. If there's a history and there's a pattern, that's something that we collectively need to improve and not just point fingers. I think initially there were a lot of issues with Fulton County, and we have seen historically that there are problems. But when we see problems replicating themselves in multiple districts, when we see the same problems in DeKalb, when we're seeing the same problems in Cobb, when we're seeing the same problems in Gwinnett, we're seeing that the volume shows us that this is a statewide problem and that we all need to stop pointing fingers and collectively fix it, especially before the November election.
Carly, here's the thing. We've just witnessed over a week of protests, well-attended, well-organized, mostly peaceful protests of people out there. And the message that a lot of people were sending to those protesters were, if you don't like the way things are, the answer is at the ballot box. That's where you get to have your voice really be heard. With all of these problems that we have seen today, and now we have this finger pointing, infighting, it's probably going to go on for a while, lawsuit stuff going on. What are we supposed to say to those young people who we've just encouraged to get out and vote?
All right. Well, thank you, Rick. I think, first of all, it's encouraging that people are actually still at the polls. It's past 7 o'clock. The times for you to vote have been already extended several hours. And people are standing in lines because they want to exercise their constitutional right to vote. So I think we should start by saying and acknowledging and applauding all those folks that are voting. But I think you're right that voting is just one part of a bigger suite of things that we can do to solve these issues that folks are protesting about. And so while it's certainly problematic that that we're having these problems at the polls, and people still should go out and vote because the polls are still open, we just have to continue to work, and our leaders have to work to fix this problem. And because until they take accountability and actually fix it, there really isn't a lot for us to do.
And Elena, real quickly, we're going to switch off of Fulton County and let's talk about DeKalb County. The CEO of DeKalb County, Michael Thurman, he tweeted earlier today that the election day issues relating to the use of state-purchased voting machines represent an attack on the democratic process. His argument is that it is the Secretary of State's responsibility to train, prepare, and equip the election staff. Otherwise, you are not ensuring a fair and equal access to the polls. A similar argument that we're also seeing from Stacey Abrams, who's been chiming in on all of the, pretty much the meltdown on Twitter.
That was for Elena.
I'm sorry, Sean. Can you repeat that question?
That's okay. I was just looking for your response regarding the DeKalb County CEO. He had stated that the election day issues relating to the use of state purchased voting machines represent an attack on the democratic process. Do you, looking from your lens, can you see his point of view? And also, the critics are saying it's still not, it's not their problem. It's not the Secretary of State's problem. It's the county's problem, and they have to deal with it.
Yeah, CEO Michael Thurman was absolutely correct. At this point, it's not a partisan issue. It is a democratic right that we all have access to these polls, right? That we are able to vote, and it's just not happening. I think while we're wasting time pointing fingers back and forth, we should really be working towards solutions. There is a runoff coming up in August that we have to mitigate these problems for, to prevent, folks from not wanting to come to the ballot. The polls any longer. They don't want to vote because they don't want to have to deal with this long lines and it's just not accessible. So I totally agree, but I think at this point we need to start talking solutions and stop pointing fingers.
Elena Rains and Carly Swift, you'll both be with us all night. We appreciate it. We'll check back with you in a little bit. Let's go now to Adam Murphy, who is live at Park Tavern, where lines are long. Is that right, Adam?
Outrageous, Rick. I've never seen anything quite like this. We're at Park Tavern here at Piedmont Park. I can tell you this is a spot where several locations have merged here when problems came about. Now take a look behind me. This is the side of Park Tavern, and this line winds all the way around to the front of the building. Then you have to go inside. The people that are at this location told me about right here, they've had to wait a good hour. Now, if you follow me back around this back side, I want to show you just how long this line is. All right, and people are waiting patiently, but this is one of the locations that will be open until 9 o'clock tonight. But look how long this line goes. It goes all the way as far as the eye can see back there. Okay, and people are still arriving. Obviously, if you get here before 9 o'clock, you will have to wait at this spot. There have been some notifications that have been sent out and texted as well. So these are some of the issues that people are dealing with at this particular location. We've even seen people out here that brought pizzas that were donated, and they're handing out pizzas to people to try to help them, encourage them to stay and feel good about waiting in such a very long line. One of the poll workers told me the line, it could take about 2 to 4 hours to get inside and actually cast your ballot. So we're going to head back again this way. I understand we may have a little bit of audio issues, so I'm staying close to the camera, and you'll see all these people as they've been waiting to get inside. Let's see if I can find somebody that might give me an idea. I'll come up to you right here. Hey, how are you? How long have you been waiting at this point?
Like 50 minutes.
50 minutes or so?
At this point, or since I got in line?
Okay. So 50 minutes from about this spot right here.
No.
From the right. That's what I'm saying. From the back of the line to here.
Yeah.
Yeah, 50 minutes. Okay. All right. Well, and it's worth it, huh? Right?
Oh,
willing to wait. Okay. Well, thank you so much. We're going to come back here in just a moment. We'll have more from this particular location. We know there's a news conference that's coming up shortly, so we want to get out and get back to that. We're live at Park Tavern. Adam Murphy, CBS 46 News.
Thank you, Adam. And everybody's wondering, is this a foreshadowing, Rick, of what's to come in November? Well, 3 Democratic candidates, they're hoping for a chance to take on incumbent Republican David Perdue this November. John Ossoff, Teresa Tomlinson, and Sarah Riggs Amico facing off today in the primary. We're going to go straight to CBS 46's Brittany Miller, who has been monitoring John Ossoff's campaign. Brittany, good evening.
And he made one thing very clear. He wants to beat David Perdue in November. Now, as we know, the entire point of today is that he has to get through tonight's primaries in order to get to November. He has 6 contenders to beat, including the former Columbus mayor, Teresa Tomlinson, and also businesswoman Sarah Riggs Amico. But we have to talk about how we got here. We all know Jon Ossoff's name from 2017 when he ran to represent Georgia's 6th congressional district, narrowly losing in a runoff to Karen Handel by about a margin of 3 points. Now, this was the most expensive race in U.S. history. Ossoff raised more than $23 million, making history there. But during our interview today, Ossoff expressed a lot of frustration with the voting process today, as we've been hearing all newscasts, really going on throughout Metro Atlanta as well, calling this voter suppression. So I asked him what would he do to fix the problem if he did win the race. Here's what he had to say.
A new Civil Rights Act that will empower the Department of Justice to hold police departments, prosecutors, and judges at all levels accountable to uniform standards of civil and constitutional rights, and a new Voting Rights Act that will ensure every single citizen of this state and this country is able to participate in our democracy without having to wait 6 hours to vote, without fear that perhaps their vote has not been counted properly.
And as we've been seeing for the past 20 minutes, in Cobb County with Alicia, also in Fulton County with Adam Murphy, long lines are happening right now. And Jon Ossoff wants to say to those voters, do not be deterred. Cast your ballot by any means necessary. I have much more coming from him in the next few minutes or so. Sean and Rick.
All right. Thank you, Brittany. We appreciate that update. And Rick, I know that you have been tracking what Haley is doing in Columbus.
That's right. CBS 46's Haley Mason is live there tonight at Teresa Tomlinson's campaign headquarters. And Tomlinson used to be mayor of Columbus, right, Haley?
That is correct. The very first female mayor here in Columbus, Georgia, and she is considering this race for Senate a 2-person race against Jon Ossoff as they both try to unseat David Perdue. We're actually live in one of the only headquarters of the night that is open with people inside. I'm going to give you a look at Teresa Tomlinson's campaign headquarters right now. She has some staff members that just walked into their, quote, war room. Also some interns working tonight, and she has been closely watching the voting problems throughout Metro Atlanta tonight, where she's been doing a lot of work to get people on her team through this election season. Now, Columbus has not been without problems either. At least one precinct started 30 minutes late here, but not nearly as many problems as we've seen in the Metro Atlanta area. Tomlinson says she is hoping that voters stay in line. Here's a little bit of her reaction about what's happening right now with the elections in Georgia.
Obviously very concerned. We've been working in Atlanta so hard, and as you know, we really feel like it's a 2-person race, and my primary other opponent has a lot of name recognition, and so the fact that we've been up in Atlanta, working that area so hard, and now those voters may not be able to get to the polls, that's a great concern for us. We want to make sure, we just want a fair showing, that's all.
And right now, Tomlinson says she has boots on the ground. We saw some of her campaign team out on the street with signs and music and flags waving for people to support her tonight. And we do want to know she got quite a few celebrity endorsements from Atlanta rappers T.I. and Ludacris, as well as rapper Ice Cube, and Atlanta singer Usher Raymond. Celebrity endorsements coming in late this afternoon, a symbol of her trying to bridge the gap between the rural area and then the metro urban area. We'll be here all night watching these polling issues and following the results when they come in later. For now, we're live in Columbus. Haley Mason, CBS 46 News.
All right, thank you, Haley. Georgia's Secretary of State vowing not to release any results until all precincts close. We're going to bring in our political analysts Elena Rains and Carly Swift.
So, Carly, talk to us about the importance of Georgia's congressional primaries that are on the line tonight. And let's start with that, the one that a lot of people are watching tonight. And this has to do with the potential rematch between Lucy McBath and Karen Handel. Is that what we're expecting to see?
Absolutely, it is what we're expecting to see. Just to start off and answer your question, what's important about the congressional races, in 2018, the Democratic Party was able to regain control of the House of Representatives. And they did that with the flipping of the seat that Lucy McBath won. She won that in a hotly contested election where she was able to defeat Karen Handel. A lot of us recall that Karen Handel defeated Jon Ossoff in a special election in 2017. So this matchup would be both a rematch for Lucy McBath and Karen Handel. It's also going to be a bit of a bellwether for the elections in November, because the 6th district was a historically Republican suburban district. And with Lucy McBath's win, it has turned that district into a purple district. And so it will be really interesting to see what happens. We expect Lucy McBath obviously to win in the Democratic primary, and there is a higher expectation at this point that Karen Handel will also pull off a win in the Republican primary.
Elena, let me ask you this about just being the devil's advocate with Karen Handel, is that she's faced Lucy McBath before and she lost. So will her constituents, will her voting base really back up behind her, believing that if they had to face up again, that she could actually come out on top this time?
That's a great question. So I think that's something that we're watching tonight. She did lose to the incumbent right now in 2018. I think we are waiting to see what that rematch looks like. Traditionally, you see a lot of outside interest pouring funds into this race, and you really haven't seen that yet. So I think her viability will be determined based on her numbers and really based on the national support we see coming up towards the general.
Let's take a look at some of the other congressional races and the primaries that are on the line tonight. Democratic Congressman Hank Johnson is the incumbent in the 4th congressional district here in Georgia, but he's got a couple of primary challengers tonight, doesn't he? How do you think he's going to fare, Carly?
Well, I think that Congressman Scott has a strong chance of winning the primary. However, he does have challengers. He has a challenger of Jonquil Peters, who was formerly the mayor of East Point. He also has a challenger in the former Democratic Party chair of Cobb County. And so I think that, again, both of them they are sort of outside chances to pull this off. I mean, if you were a betting person, I think David Scott is likely going to win it. But it is always good for there to be some competition. And so that's another race that we're going to be watching as the results start to come in.
Okay, well, we're going to come back to you, Carly and Elena, in just a moment. But CBS 46's Harry Samler, he's been monitoring the big board. Some of the precincts have closed, Harry, and you've been looking at which counties are leaning in the U.S. Senate race. Hopefully you got some results in so far.
I would love to have some results for you, Sean, but in a time like this, you just don't know what's going to happen next, especially because of all of the people who are still out trying to vote and standing in line. So where in a normal situation you would have the polls closing at 7, we would get some results in, and this is the big race that we're following, Jon Ossoff versus Teresa Tomlinson and Sarah Riggs Amico. You've got name recognition, you got a 2-term mayor right here from Muskogee County. Well, not from, but she lived in Atlanta for quite a while. And then you got the business executive. You start seeing maybe some of these precincts come in, but because people are still out there and they haven't voted, and this could be going on for hours, the ability to come in here and start filling this board in, and let's just assume Teresa was going to take Muskogee, we'd start, filling it in right there. Excuse my drawing, I'm not the best drawer, but we can't do that right now. Everything is on hold because of what's going on, and you've got this battle going on between the counties and the Secretary of State, who's saying, hey, you guys should have been ready. So we are going to keep an eye on things, and hopefully throughout the night we can start filling some of this in. But as of right now, I got to pull out the eraser and start taking some of this off, because we just don't know what's going to happen next. I'm going to send it back to you guys while I try and get this off the board.
I think you've got it. Real high tech over there, Harry.
Let's hope we don't have to do too much erasing tonight.
You may not get to fill it in for a few days. All right, Georgia's 6th congressional district could set up a rematch between Democratic incumbent Lucy McBath and Republican Karen Handel. Handel trying to fight off 4 other Republicans in her primary today. Alicia Roberts, she is live in Cobb County as the electorate heads to the polls. Your poll's still open, isn't it, Alicia?
Yeah, that's right, Sean. If you're heading out here in Cobb County, well, you got to expect a few things. A, voting officials told you to bring a mask and pack your patience. And that 6th congressional race is a backdrop for potentially other problems happening. Take a look at voters behind me here. They have been gathered all afternoon in long lines, many waiting for hours to make sure their votes are heard. Weather conditions have not been favorable for this primary Tuesday here. Folks have really had to brave some of the elements. We had some quite some strong storms here moving by just within the last few minutes or so. I want to see if I can move up here. This is the top of the line right now as we want to talk to some folks who have been waiting the longest today. Those we did talk to already saying they are not being deterred by some of the conditions that are out here. Folks, can I talk to you for just a quick second? How long have you guys been waiting in line today? How long have you been waiting in line?
About an hour and a half now.
Hour and a half right now. Do you vote here often? Is this your?
This is our location.
Okay. How's today been relative to other years?
Pretty much the same as far as the crowd goes and everything. So.
Pretty much the same. We've heard that long lines have been longer here. Do you expect to see this many people out?
We do. Definitely. Just about every election year, it's like this. So.
Okay. Very good. Weather not deterring you today from casting your...
of course not.
Okay. Thank you so much. Well, that's some good news here. We heard wait times up to 3 to 4 hours here at Austell. By the way, 19 precincts in Cobb County have extended their hours by 1 hour. So now instead of 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, that means if you're in line by 8 o'clock, you will have the chance to make sure you vote. Behind the scenes right now in the 6th district in Cobb County, we've got a rematch that a lot of folks are looking for. It's the incumbent, Lucy McBath, Democrat, versus Karen Handel, former Secretary of State. There's already been a bit of a war of words on Twitter. Lucy McBath just a few minutes ago tweeting out saying it shouldn't be this hard to vote, talking about some voter suppression issues happening in her district. Karen Handel saying that McBath is making this a political race, saying it's not about Republicans versus Democrats, but making sure all votes count. One election to watch, by the way, McBath and Handel. Back in 2018, it was pretty close, 50.5 to 49.5%. So a race that presumably, if we get the rematch we think we will today, is going to shape up to be one to watch come November. We'll keep you posted on conditions here in Austell. For now, we'll send it back to you guys.
Rain or shine, they are staying in line. Alicia, thank you. Now let's bring in our political analyst, Dr. Rashad Ritchie, to give us a little bit more perspective. And Rashad, you've been listening to our coverage and some of the big complaints, is it voter suppression or is it a bit of just technical glitches that just could not get fixed in time, but it appears in some precincts now, Rashad, they're working.
Yeah, it is voter suppression, regardless if it's intentional or unintentional. The impact is still the same. People going to vote, people wanting to participate in democracy, and people going home because something is not working. So while a lot of individuals are going to spend their energy seeing or explaining if this was a conspiracy or just negligence, the bottom line is the result is the exact same. We now have disenfranchised voters in the state of Georgia who woke up this morning and said they were going to risk their lives. We're still in the middle of a pandemic in order to participate in democracy. And it's interesting that COVID-19 did not stop them. The coronavirus didn't stop them. What stopped them? A failure in democracy, a failure in planning, a failure in leadership is the reason why this is happening. I'm actually looking forward to the information that will come from these investigations, and these investigations need to start immediately.
There's a press conference that's expected to start at any time now.
Any minute now.
Yeah. What are you, from your lens, what do you expect to hear come out of that press conference?
I expect to hear some excuses as to why this happened. I also expect to hear some blame to be allocated to others, and maybe some expression of guilt or sorrow or remorse for how this happened. I expect to hear all of that in this press conference. And here's the thing about the supervisor of elections. for Fulton County. He serves at the pleasure of the county commission. At some point, this is going to turn very political, and the county commission, who they are responsible to the people, they will have to give a response as to why this continues to happen in Fulton County.
Rashad, I always like to look for early indicators, little clues, little hints that may give us a sense of what's to come when the results pour in either later tonight or possibly even tomorrow. We'll have to wait and see. But let's talk about turnout, because sometimes that's a very good indicator that one side or the other is doing particularly well. And we have seen, and at least in going out to our reporters, anecdotally, we've seen long lines, even in the rain. People are standing there, they're waiting their turn, sometimes an hour, 2 hours or more. So if you were to sort of just take a look at those lines and take a look at those people that are on the lines, what does that tell you about what the results may be like tonight?
Well, I can already tell you who's going to win tonight, Rick. Lawyers. Lawyers are going to win tonight because at the end of this election cycle, there will be a lot of lawsuits and challenges. But these long lines tell me that there's what we call a hyper turnout. I've already checked the numbers in not only Metro Atlanta, but also many counties in rural Georgia. They have experienced a record early vote turnout already. As a matter of fact, some counties in Metro Atlanta are reporting record primary election numbers without calculating today. So they are way over their expected turnout. So there's an interest here that we have not seen in a very long time. And this hyper turnout typically means you will have an increased number of participants in the general election. However, because of these massive failures today in the voting machines and training, you may see some of that enthusiasm get lessened as you move to November.
With these record turnouts, Rashad, the question now is who benefits if there are faults within the system, including what we've seen, no pins for making your vote. There was none of the paperwork for the provisionary ballots, or the poll workers not showing up, or the machines breaking down, or not working at all, or the machine's not there. Period. Which party benefits if these kind of glitches exist?
Well, first of all, it depends on the county. If the county is leaning Republican and you have a decreased turnout, then obviously Republican candidates are hurt, Democratic candidates the same. But let's talk about overall numbers. I want to give you an example. The U.S. Senate race. You have a very contentious U.S. Senate race with Jon Ossoff, Teresa Tomlinson, Amico, and others. That Senate race is going to possibly go into a runoff. Now, if the Senate race is close, and here's my prediction, I think the two top ticket individuals will be Jon Ossoff and Teresa Tomlinson, okay? I do think likely that race goes into a runoff, but it could possibly be won outright. DeKalb County and Fulton County are big counties for Jon Ossoff, no secret in that. But if DeKalb and Fulton County are the counties that experience the most extreme voter suppression due to these errors and negligence, then that could hurt Jon Ossoff and could be the difference between him winning an election or possibly going into a runoff. I fully expect races that are within 2,000 to 10,000 votes to all be challenged on some level. And remember, before we got till today, before we got here, 2 weeks ago, Georgia voters were already complaining that they put in their absentee ballot request on time, and counties were telling them everything will work out. We're getting it to you right away. The Secretary of State said they were getting it to them right away. And to this very day, there are people, including some elected officials I've spoken with, they never received an absentee ballot. That is a separate investigation, but it adds to the vote total of how many individuals were likely disenfranchised during this election cycle.
We're throwing around a couple of terms, runoff, for example. I think it might be a good idea just to remind everybody, because this is not something that we sort of cover on a day-to-day basis. What do you mean, Rashad? What are the ramifications of candidates getting less than the amount needed that would trigger? What triggers a runoff?
You know, a lot of people say 51% is what you need in order to win an election. That is untrue. It is not 51% for statewide elections in Georgia, nor congressional races, and the majority of your county races. It is actually 50% plus one vote. 50% plus one vote gives you what's called a constitutional mandate to govern. And once you have your constitutional mandate to govern, you become that position and elect in that position. So right now you have a very tight U.S. Senate race. You have some congressional races, obviously, that may tighten up. And you have a slew of county races. For example, DeKalb County, they have an opportunity to elect their first female sheriff in the history of that county. That is a competitive race as well. But the threshold to have your constitutional mandate to govern in Georgia is 50% plus one single vote.
So how is it decided then who gets to participate in a runoff?
Well, based on the two top vote getters. So regardless of how many votes you get, if you're under 50%, you and that other person who's in second place, both of you get into a runoff. And that runoff is sanctioned and governed also by the Secretary of State. Those runoffs will happen in the month of August.
What would be considered an upset if it was to happen in this race today?
You know, there are a lot of potential upsets. If Sarah Riggs-Amico, if she won the U.S. Senate race outright, that would be an upset because all of the polling data indicates that she's either tier 2 or tier 3 in that candidacy race. Also, if Melody Maddox out of DeKalb County, if she does not either win outright or go into a runoff, that will be an upset. And also there's a closer race in Fulton County, the Fulton County District Attorney's race. Paul Howard is the current incumbent. He's been there since the 90s. This is the race of his life. He has never had such a competitive race. Fani Willis is one of his opponents. She's a former chief judge of the city of South Fulton, and also a young man named Christian Y. Smith. What's interesting here is that all of the candidates running against the district attorney are former employees of the district attorney. But this is a tight race. That race will come down to Fani Willis and the DA. And I think he may go into a runoff tonight, possibly.
Wow.
We were hoping to hear from Richard Barron with the Fulton County Election Board. We have just been told, though, that they are in a meeting. And so that news conference that we have been teasing perhaps as early as 7:15, which is a half an hour ago, now might not happen until 9 o'clock, Rashad. But they did release a statement, and I just want to release, this is from Richard Barron at the Fulton County Election Board, and he goes through a whole slew of things that the board has had to deal with this year that they hadn't had to deal with before, like COVID and other things. But he said that the majority of our precincts had minimal issues throughout the day. All that being said, this is a learning experience for our team, and we have some takeaways from today's events. We've identified several areas for improvement to help us be better prepared for the general election in November. Specifically, these include our absentee ballot process, tailoring poll worker training to emphasize the issues we identified today, and undertaking an efficiency review for the other process improvements.
Sounds like an apology.
It sounds a little bit like an admission. Yeah. You said you expected to hear some excuses, and eventually we will hear from Mr. Barron later on tonight, but just based on a couple paragraphs that I read you from the statement, any response, Rashad?
There's a bunch of bunk. That's my response to that. He was well aware of these issues leading up to the election. As a matter of fact, he came on my radio show just a few weeks ago. We talked about these issues with the chairman of Fulton County, Rob Pitts. We were very open and transparent in that conversation, and he said that we would not have these glitches. Rick, Sean, this would be different if this was the first time. This is not the first time. This is not the second time. This is not the third time. This election supervisor has supervised multiple elections in Fulton County that have gone off the tracks. And I understand his statement. What else do you expect the guy to say? But these things were well known. You can't blame it on the population of Fulton County because Gwinnett has a high population. You can't blame it on not having a large enough budget because Fulton County has the biggest Board of Elections budget in the state of Georgia out of 159 counties. So you're kind of running out of people to blame here. What you really should look at is how were we not prepared for what everybody in this state was aware of? And that was the fact that you would have a record number of absentee ballots requested, you would have a record number of absentee votes cast, and you would have significant lines at your precinct due to COVID-19 safety mandates. Nobody would say these were unknowns. We all knew them, even those that are outside of the realm of elected politics.
Well, Rashad, we're going to come back to you and bounce off some more of your insight on this election cycle. But first, we have some breaking news that we're following out of Fulton County. A few minutes ago, we heard from Fulton County's election administrator about long lines, non-working machines, and problems at the polls. We were just discussing this with Rashad. Richard Barron issued a statement saying COVID-19 presented unique staffing and logistical challenges. He said it identified several areas that need improvement. In part, he says, quote, specifically, these include our absentee ballot process, tailoring poll worker training to emphasize the issues we identified today, and undertaking an efficiency review for other process improvements, end of quote. We are still waiting to get him in front of the cameras for a full interview. But Tracy, let's go over to you. You got some news from the live desk.
Yeah, I do. Well, former Vice President Joe Biden is sounding off about the problems at the polls here in Georgia. His campaign calling it completely unacceptable that there were long lines and significant issues with the voting machines. Biden is the presumptive Democratic nominee. And by the way, with more than 75% of the vote here in Georgia, granted only one precinct reporting here, but he is far ahead of his opponent there for the Democratic ticket, Bernie Sanders. You can see that across the bottom of our screen there. Well, his campaign hopes to energize Georgia's African-American voters, and today's issues, well, they have undermined that. The campaign says they will remain fully engaged in defending Georgians' right to vote with November's election just months away. I'm Tracy Hutchins at the Live Desk.
All right, thank you, Tracy. And let's go back to CBS 46's Alicia Roberts, live in Austell with more on issues in Cobb County. Alicia, good evening.
Yeah, Sean, the rain has picked up here now. It has been raining for about an hour or so. I want you to take a look at the lines behind me here. These folks, though, not deterred by the elements, and actually spirits pretty high. Just a minute or so ago, we saw pizzas being delivered here, making sure folks have a little bit of dinner while they're waiting in line. Also, there's been bottles of water, volunteers handing that out, along with ponchos. Most brought their umbrellas and masks because everyone is voting during a pandemic here. I want to see if I can talk with William Tanks as well here, election official up in Cobb County. Mr. Tanks, thanks for joining us. I know it's a busy day for you. We've heard about long lines at this polling location. This is one of 19 precinct locations in the county, staying open until 8 o'clock. What's been the issue here? Why were the lines so long today?
It's a combination of a lot of things. If you have, in this particular place, there's a lot of people signed to this poll, but also we want to be very careful that we turn no one away. So we've also had people come to this poll who are not registered to vote in this poll. They want to go to other polls, but once they get in line, instead of leaving, we tell them if you're in line, we're going to allow you to vote. And also, of course, the COVID-19, which you probably see is probably gone slightly out the window. But when you add COVID-19, new equipment, less poll workers, and you get all these things put together, it just causes glitches. There's no particular one issue to blame, just a combination of things.
And let's talk about the equipment. How many machines are available here in Austell?
Yes, right. We typically would have 6 at this location, but because of the line, we added 4 more machines to this location.
Are all 10 working then?
Yes, all 10 are working now. Yeah.
Well, this location was one of the locations that opened on time, or was it late?
No, this one opened up a little delayed, and it was mainly because of the equipment. But this is the reason why we're staying open later.
Okay. What do you say to voters who say waiting in line, some of the voters that we talked to 2, 3, 4 hours, is just unacceptable? What do you say to those voters?
Understandably that they're frustrated. No one likes to stand in a long line and wait any time. But when you look at, we had a pandemic, we have new equipment. My suggestion is just anybody, this is one time if you could have used mail-in ballots, or you could have done early voting, I would have definitely took advantage of that because we expected long lines. You have a lot of folks on the ballot, especially the Democratic ballot here in this district, and there's going to be a lot of folks to turn out, especially with issues going around the country. Folks are motivated to vote, so you'd expect a large turnout. So I would just say, understand your frustration. We're doing the best we can to make folks comfortable and convenient and work with the equipment we have. But this is one of those times that, if I'm in your shoes, especially in November, if we're in the same situation, early voting or mail-in ballots is the way to go.
And let's talk about the protests, bringing people out to the polls. Cobb County said to expect long lines. Were these lines longer than even you expected?
No, we expected glitches. To be honest with you, we expected there would be some delays, especially with trying to maintain social distancing, which I'm quite sure your camera reveals.
We're not doing the best job either here. A lot of folks do have their masks with them.
Right. But we expected some delays because we were going to try to maintain social distancing and make sure that voters had access. So, yes, we expected this. We just prepared for the hit.
And so for anybody standing in line here until 8 o'clock, their vote will be counted.
Absolutely. That's going to be the challenge, making sure that 7:59 we have someone at the end of that line to make sure that the person's votes get counted.
All right, Mr. Tanks, thank you so much for your time on a busy Tuesday primary election night. We're going to be checking back in with you, make sure we keep in touch in terms of how things are going for the rest of the night. But the rain continues to fall here in Austell. Lines still forming here. Your vote counts until 7:59. Got to get in line at this location and the 18 others that have those extended hours. You heard it from officials. They expected glitches. They expected long lines. Not sure that all of those voters agree with that, but for now, that's what we're seeing right here in Cobb County. Send it back to the studio.
All right. Thank you, Alicia. We appreciate that update. Rick, we'll go over to you.
Yeah, let's go over to Adam Murphy. Check in with him again. He's over at Park Tavern. The lines are long. They are handing out pizzas. I saw the porta potties are there just in case anybody needs that. What's the latest, Adam?
Hey there, Rick. Let me tell you, it has improved somewhat, but we were told on our last broadcast out here that some people were waiting 2 to 4 hours to cast a ballot. Now, the line begins back here, okay, so it's not quite as bad. We're right next to Piedmont Park. This is Park Tavern. People are lined up right here. And then, as you can see, we're going to take this line all the way around the side of the building and to the front of Park Tavern where people are going inside to vote. And yes, earlier there were some people that were handing out pizza, which was really nice. I mean, some pizza places had donated pizza to people out here to give them something to eat while they were waiting so long. Let me see if I can speak with some of these people over here that just got in line. How you guys doing?
Good, how are you?
So what do you think so far? I mean, this line isn't quite as bad as it was.
Oh yeah, believe me, I was here 6 hours ago. The line is all the way to the corners, all the way.
How long have you waited thus far?
Oh no, I went home, take a nap. I'm getting old.
So you went home and said, I'll come back when it's not quite as long.
Back when it's not too busy. So.
What do you think about this? Obviously, as I understand, there are at least a couple of precinct locations that merged here.
6 to be exact. 16,000 people crammed into this little, place. So anyway, I'm puzzled. I live in the Johns Creek, also part of Fulton County for 15 years. I moved here 4 or 5 years ago. And I never spent more than 5 minutes in Johns Creek. And here, 3 hours, 4 hours.
Wow. But obviously, it's so important that you're willing to be here and wait as long as it takes, I presume.
I'm a proud American by choice, ABC. I coined the word.
Very good. Well, listen, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Good luck. Great example of someone that realizes the importance of coming out here and keeps a good attitude through all of this, because easily, people can become frustrated having to wait, like he said, 3 or 4 hours to get inside and cast their ballot. But everybody seems to be in pretty good spirits here. Line is improving. Even look at this. Let's turn it back one more time. Remember when we began this live report? The line was back there by the porta potties, not anymore. So things are improving. Multiple locations here at the Park Tavern. They're open until 9 o'clock. If you're in line before 9 o'clock, look at the line, folks. If you're in line before 9 o'clock, you will be able to get inside and get your vote in. So that's all good news. Again, I haven't seen anything quite like this. And from somebody, speaking for myself, it took me less than 10 minutes to vote today. So I can't imagine what these people have had to go through. We're going to continue to monitor the situation here. Just know that if this is your location now, you can make it here. You can get in before 9 o'clock. And the line is starting to get a little bit shorter. So that's good news. If you're watching this broadcast and still need to get out and vote, you have time. We're live at Park Tavern. Adam Murphy, CBS 46 News.
Adam, thank you. I'm Tracy Hutchins at the Live Desk. We do have some breaking news right now. Georgia NAACP just filed an emergency injunction to keep polling sites in Gwinnett County open until 10 o'clock tonight. In a tweet, they added the additional time would provide the adequate number of hours specified under state law. Under the law, the polls are supposed to be open from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. That's 12 hours. There have been reports of voting precincts in Gwinnett County not having the scanners to scan paper ballots, no printers to print the ballots, no paper to print the ballots on, or voting equipment at all. So again, an injunction filed by the NAACP to keep the polling sites in Gwinnett County open until 10 o'clock tonight. Of course, we will continue to follow this story. I'm Tracy Hutchins at the Live Desk.
Let's bring back in our political analysts, Elena Rains and Carly Swift. And, you know, you're listening to Tracy's report about the NAACP and this new injunction. What is this a foreshadowing of what we could possibly see with the election in November?
Well, absolutely. I think that even before we get to the November election, though, we have to think about the runoff that's likely to occur. And so it's going to be very important that these issues are corrected before the August runoff. But to your point related to November, I think you're going to see a series of lawsuits filed not only by the NAACP, but also potentially from the ACLU of Georgia, as well as other nonprofits that are focused on voting, like Fair Fight and the New Georgia Project. Elena,
let me ask you just briefly how this works, because we have this emergency injunction. So for those of us who might not be up on election law, who is going to hear this case, and who's going to make a decision? Because obviously it's almost 8 o'clock, and this is a petition to keep the polls open till 10.
Yeah. So I know Carly is a practicing attorney, and I think she'd be better to answer that question.
Sure. So the injunction will likely be heard in Fulton County Superior Court. I don't know what judge will be assigned to hearing the arguments related to the injunction, but obviously it will be an emergency hearing, and we will find out quickly whether that injunction is going to be approved by the courts.
All right. Well, let me just go back to Elena, because I asked her a question. I want to ask her another question that she might feel more comfortable talking about, and that is sort of overall, if we look at this big picture and we see the amount of interest, this is a primary election, Elena. This is not a general election. You don't typically see long waiting lines, people waiting for hours and hours to vote in a primary. What does it tell you that this is what we're looking at tonight?
Yeah. So, voters were really engaged. Aside from everything that happened tonight, voters were super energized. We had, record turnout. There was 1.2 million early voters this year. That we're on par to break records, break history. So we're really excited about that. But what we don't want to do is discourage voters from moving forward in the general election. So these problems need to be reconciled as soon as possible. And we need to make sure that officials are publicly taking accountability for this and moving forward together. So again, it's not about projecting blame. It's about finding solutions and moving forward to encourage voters to want to turn out for the runoff and the general election in November.
And Carly, this question is for you, because it was record turnout, but you also have a new wave of young voters who just got registered and they're voting for the first time, and they're seeing, the NAACP's injunction. They're seeing also several other, like Fair Fight Georgia, along with other civil rights nonprofit groups, really pushing for those polls to extend their hours. How much of this, for that new voter who has never participated in this process before, to hear about the lawsuits, hear about the injunctions, and go, what part of this is political theater?
Mm-hmm. That is a really good question. I think that when you are a new voter, when it is your first time voting, it's easy for you to get discouraged, and it's easy for you to decide not to vote again. And so what we don't want to happen, which is why I think you have organizations like the NAACP, organizations like Fair Fight, and a host of other organizations working to make sure that the polls stay open, that people have the opportunity to vote if they want to vote. But ultimately, I think it's going to be up to candidates in the upcoming election, both in runoffs and in the general, to give people a reason to want to come out and vote for them. As Elena mentioned, there were over 1 million people that cast early votes. That's almost exceeded the already high number of votes that were cast in 2016, which was a historic number of votes. And I think it was because in 2016, people were motivated to get out and vote. And so if the candidates can really motivate their voters to come out, I think that they will come out. And I think that new voters will also stay energized, especially as they see organizations working for them and working to make sure that they can vote.
Elena, as we see the numbers when it comes to people who have early voted, people who have voted by mail, people who have requested absentee ballots, and even though there were some issues with that, people not receiving those absentee ballots. Is this really the wave of the future? I mean, it seems like you get a lot more participation. It's a lot easier for people to navigate the process. You simply fill out your ballot and drop it back in the mail. And you get to avoid the kinds of scenes that we're seeing around the metro area with people waiting in line for hours to vote.
Yeah, absolutely. So the vote by mail process actually was really successful at engaging voters. We had 1.6 million absentee ballot request forms. That is astronomical when compared to prior years. So this could be the wave of the future, but again, that all falls on how we move forward and how we fix the problems that we currently have. We did have those 1.6 million absentee ballots requested. 917 of those were submitted before Election Day, but they're still outstanding ballots. There's still roughly 600,000 outstanding ballots. So we're trying to figure out what happened with those and how to ensure that those votes actually count if those people did not return their ballots before today.
And I've been watching social media, Carly, and some of the comments that are on social media is for those who were forced to fill out a provisional vote. And even though they wanted to actually vote in person with a machine, but they weren't working or there were no machines there. What's the persuasive argument looking towards the future? Is the mail-in ballot, the absentee ballot, really the direction that we need to go? Or the argument for many civil rights activists who fought hard to get the right to actually go to the polls and vote with a machine? We have these new machines, but clearly, even with brand new technology, it's creating a whole list of new problems.
Right. Well, I think that in a normal context where there isn't a pandemic, so in this cycle, many of us, I myself included, voted absentee, and we did that because we didn't think that we should be out because of the COVID pandemic. However, I think that going forward, we are going to have to our leadership is going to have to think of how to broadly allow people to have access to voting. So the Secretary of State at this point has been hesitant to allow voting by email. Instead of sending applications to vote, which is what they did this cycle, they sent out 1.6 million applications to receive an absentee ballot. They could have sent out the actual ballot itself. And if folks had received the ballot, it's likely that they would have returned that instead of waiting to receive their actual ballot. So to your point, though, folks are always going to want to go to the polls and vote because you feel like that is your civic right. And we have to have a way to do that. But we also need to be flexible in how we allow people to exercise their right to vote.
Carly Swift, Elena Rains, please stand by, stay with us. We'll check back with you in a little bit.
Well, there have been ongoing protests across the state and the country over the past 2 weeks. Let's go to CBS 46's Astrid Martinez, who is live downtown. Astrid, you've been talking to protesters about election night. Well, what's their response?
Well, they're hoping that the momentum that has been happening around the country with protesting really causes a surge at the voting booth. So I'm here with a family, beautiful family, T-Love, Blossom, Isaac, Aniria, right? Anaria. I was trying to get all of them right. But I see that, thank you. I see, T-Love, that you have the Georgia sticker here, that you voted today. Why is it so important to combine the work on the streets with marching and protesting with going to the voting booth?
So that we can have a say in what goes on. The more that we protest and that we voice our right to vote, we can make a difference and a change. And that's why we're here, to speak up and stand up.
Now, I know that you said what motivated you to come out and join the protest since last week. You've been here almost every single day with your family, is watching the news. And tell me what you saw and why you decided to come out here.
Well, what I saw was a bunch of negativity in the rioting. With everything that went on within the past few months, from Ahmaud to Breonna, then George, and then the rioting, and it was just enough. I was tired. So I came down to just be a voice, to step in when I saw negativity, and I had an opportunity to do that on 3 different occasions. And I've just been networking and connecting and unifying with men and women of all races, and it's just been beautiful. And I don't want the momentum to stop, and I don't want this to be a trend. I want us to continue to fight and speak up and stand up.
Sometimes people feel like the youth will come out to these marches, but then they won't take it to the booths to vote. Tell them, I guess, why it is so important to not just come out here and, demand change, but also to make sure that, they make change when they go to the elections.
Right. It's very important to vote. And I didn't realize that in the beginning. I didn't have the privilege to vote because of my license and what happened with my license. But when I regained my privileges, it was the greatest thing ever to be able to just make a difference. And, that vote does count.
Okay, so you've been out here with your family. Blossom, can you talk to me first? Tell me why you're out here and what you're drawing on the sidewalk.
I'm out here for a reason. I'm out here for all lives, but mostly Black lives. And the sidewalk chalk, I'm letting children and other people use. And I draw a rainbow for if a rainbow light comes for any time.
You're looking for a rainbow to happen after all this craziness, huh?
Yeah, I really am.
And you are, marching and saying Black Lives Matter, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Blossom. And Isaac, you're here too. This is a song that we're hearing in the background that's produced by you.
Yes.
Tell me why it was so important to come out here with your family.
It's most definitely important because we want to be on the right side of history and being able to evoke change for the masses. And so we do that by raising our voices. And the only way that we can raise our voices is by showing up to the polls, showing up on the streets, and making sure people hear us and they see us and they feel us, because Black lives do matter.
Absolutely. And you believe also in combining the efforts at voting, right?
Yes. Because it's so important. Each time you get a chance to vote, it's you pushing your narrative, what you want to see, how you want to change the world. And so it's your superpower, in a sense. And so once you get that opportunity to, you can't let it go.
Thank you. Do you want to say something to me real quick? I know this is a park where usually people play, and today and for the last couple of days you've been marching here. Tell me about coming to this park, not playing, but marching instead.
Well, I mean, when I march, I feel like I'm doing something, like I'm making a difference. I like being out here. Like, all the people are so nice, and we're see, they're back now.
Yeah, they're back. Absolutely. I hear the protesters are all back. To hear everybody wanting justice for Black people. I mean, and finally we see so many races get behind that. Why do you think it took so long for so many people to back this movement up?
Because people are tired. They've come to a point where enough is enough. And if we don't speak up and we just sit back and allow these things to happen, they're going to continue to happen. And our voices count. and we can make a difference if we use our voice.
And you're going to have sort of like a block party here on Saturday?
Yes, Saturday we're going to be down here, and we're just going to have a jam for justice at 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. Thank you so much, T-Love. Thank you so much to your family. Most of the people that we're speaking to say they do need to combine the efforts with the work on the streets and voting at the polls, guys. We see here that a smaller group of protesters just joined the family here at Centennial Park. They came from Marietta Street, and everybody is chanting now, hands up, don't shoot. And typically they stay here till, the end of the evening. We're going to stay with the protesters, finding more if they're voting or, what they're doing besides being on the streets and voicing their opinion to really make a change in the legislature, which is typically what they're looking for, guys.
All right, Astrid, thank you. And thank you for introducing us to that great family. Well, tonight, the Secretary of State is launching an investigation into precinct problems across Atlanta. We are still waiting for a news conference from the Fulton County Elections Office that we're told now should happen sometime around 9 p.m. We'll have it for you live. Meantime, CBS 46's Carolyn Ryan is live tonight with more on the problems that we've been seeing today. Carolyn.
Hi, Rick. Yeah, we've been kind of bopping around from precinct to precinct just to get a pulse of an accurate pulse of what folks are seeing right now. So we have moved a location since I was last live with you. We are now off of Hank Aaron Drive. There's a substantial line here. The location I was just at, the Ralph Bunch polling precinct, one of the biggest in Fulton County. There was no line there, so it kind of just depends on where you're at. Now, I will note the issues with voting machines, it's not all of the long lines are attributed to that. There's a number of factors at play here, of course, coronavirus being one of the main ones, the social distancing, lack of poll workers. There's less poll workers than they've seen in the past due to coronavirus as well. So those factors are all at play. We did just speak with some voters who walked out today who said it took them 3 hours start to finish to get through the line. They said they encountered no problems at all once they got in, just the wait outside. So that's some good news. Even still, we have to address what happened today, why so many people encountered problems at the polls with those voting machines. And there is a battle brewing, make no mistake. The state is saying that the county election boards are to blame, and the county election boards and other political activists online are saying the state is to blame. The bottom line is, by now, you've probably seen the video of all the long lines at some polling precincts across the area. You've probably heard people online saying that the voting machines were down and that was the reason for those long lines. Now, Georgia does indeed have new voting machines. We got them months ago. We got over 33,000 of them, along with 3,800 scanners, 8,000 polling pads, all from a company called Dominion Voting Systems out of Denver, Colorado. They were sent to the state. The state tested those machines. They then trained the counties on how to use those machines. They delivered all of them to all 150 plus counties in the state of Georgia. At that point, each county is then responsible to train the poll workers and figure out logistics on getting that equipment to the polling precincts and coordinating a smooth voting experience from there. So, what happened today? Who dropped the ball? Well, I went straight to the man whose sole responsibility was to oversee these new voting machines for the state of Georgia. His name is Gabriel Sterling. I spoke with him one-on-one today, and he says that it is not a voting machine issue, but rather a human error issue. I asked him, can you say 100% without a doubt that there were no machine malfunctions today, as so many people, including the mayor of Atlanta and others, continue to say? Here's what he said.
Absolutely 100%, because what's happened is when we get those reports, we send technicians to those precincts and they get there and realize, oh, you plugged this in backwards, or oh, you didn't put this code in right. One of the biggest things we saw this morning was poll workers putting the activation cards, the little green cards they use to activate the voting machines, backwards. They were putting them backwards like, oh, it's not encoding because the chip is in the wrong way. It took a while to figure that out, and then they started to be able to function. So we're seeing those lines start to get pared down over time.
So that man you just heard from, Sterling there, he said that he has a team of IT people who are going out, they're troubleshooting these issues at various polling precincts, and that is how he knows that none of the issues today were stemming from the actual machines themselves, but rather human error. So he said that he also wanted to know the new, once the technicians got those polling workers back on track, things began to run much more smoothly. So the question is, where do we go from here, right? Well, the state has launched an investigation investigation into DeKalb and Fulton counties, and the state says particularly Fulton County has been plagued with election issues for years, and they think this could have all been avoided. Now, the Georgia House of Representatives, Speaker David Ralston, he has also called for an investigation into what went wrong today. So there will be more to come on all of this. But most importantly, people want to know this is not going to happen again come August 11th when we have runoff races, and more importantly too than the general election in November. They want to know that this isn't going to happen again. So I also asked Mr. Sterling that question as well. How is he going to ensure, and what steps is he going to take from here? What can the state do to ensure this doesn't happen again? And he said, quote, train, train, train. It sounds like they want to regroup from here. They want to get back with all of the directors of each individual county election boards and get back to work on training these systems. And I will note too, Rick, that these voting systems, they have been in use. They've been in use for the early voting. And they had no problems. He said, though, today with so many people ascending on so many different polling precincts, that was the reason. A lot of these workers, he said, just didn't know how to use these machines properly. And also some of them got delivered really late, again, which falls on each individual county. So that is something they're all going to look at. The good news is interest is really high in this election, in this primary. And we've already seen, even before one single person stepped foot inside a polling precinct today, we already had over 1 million people cast votes in this primary election through early and absentee voting. So that's the good news. Interest is high. Folks are staying out here. The polls are open late, as we've been reporting, but lots more to come on these investigations that are trying to get to the bottom of what exactly went wrong today and why. Back to you.
Good questions. It might be a while until we get the answers, but we're going to keep digging for them. Carolyn Ryan, live for us. Thank you, Carolyn. A major race tonight on the local level. Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard trying to win another term. It would be his 7th. He is taking on Christian Wise Smith and Fannie Willis. Howard is currently under investigation by the GBI, although he denies any wrongdoing. CBS 46's Adam Murphy joins us once again live at Park Tavern for more on this particular race for Fulton County DA. And how's it shaping up, Adam?
Well, good evening, Rick. I'm here at Park Tavern right at Piedmont Park, and you can see the line is still really long. This location will be open until 9 o'clock. And like you mentioned, one of the hot races on the ballot is the race for Fulton County District Attorney. Now, I want to show you all 3 candidates here. We're going to take some video so you can see who is in this race. Obviously, from left to right, we have Paul Howard, we have Fannie Willis, and we also have Christian Wise Smith. Paul Howard, as you mentioned, has been a DA for more than 2 decades. He is currently under GBI investigation, Rick, which I know you talked about, for allegedly using nonprofit funds to supplement his salary. Obviously, he's also been criticized lately for bringing charges so quickly against 2 Atlanta police officers or I should say 6 Atlanta police officers involved in a tasing incident during one of the Black Lives Matter protests, which just happened. And some of the competitors in this race have said that was purely political. Obviously, Paul Howard disagrees. He felt like officers should be held accountable just as anyone else. Now let's talk about Fannie Willis for a moment. She was the chief judge of South Fulton. She is a Howard alum, Emory law degree. She worked in the private sector. She worked also in the Fulton County DA's office and was the assistant DA under Paul Howard. And then finally, we have Christian Wise Smith. And Christian Wise Smith has said the criminal justice system in Fulton County hasn't changed since 1997. He wants to focus on serious crimes, and he has also, too, worked for Fulton County DA Paul Howard. So really interesting race here with these candidates. And there are a lot of people that think there could be an upset in the making against the incumbent Paul Howard because of some of the controversial issues Howard is dealing with right now that have become very public. Now, just moments ago, I got off of an interview that I had done with Christian Wise Smith, and I asked him about working for his old boss, Paul Howard, and what he thinks about this particular race. And here's what he had to say about Paul Howard.
I hope he enjoys his retirement. You know, the community has has dealt with him and his way of leadership for 23 years. And so now it's time for a revolution where we break the chains of the past and we make our justice system value people over conviction rates. We restore people through the justice system. We give people opportunities and education, and that way they're busy working on themselves and their families, and they won't be busy committing crimes against us.
Now, I have an interview set up with Fani Willis within the next half hour, so coming up shortly, you'll be hearing from her. I've reached out to Paul Howard's team as well. They have not agreed to do an interview with us at this point in time. They told me that he is out meeting with voters, dealing with this crisis in Fulton County with the long lines and obviously the problems with the machines. So we are waiting to see if that will turn around and Paul Howard will speak. But at this point in time, you just heard from Christian Y. Smith, and you will hear from Fani Willis within the next half hour, 45 minutes or so. That's where things stand right now. We highly predict that this race will not be called this evening because of the issues in Fulton County, but anything could change. We'll stay on top of developments as numbers begin to roll in. We're live at Park Tavern in Fulton County here in Atlanta. Adam Murphy, CBS 46 News.
Adam, thank you. The Georgia NAACP just filed an emergency injunction to keep polling sites in Gwinnett County open until 10 p.m. tonight. We are joined now by Reverend James Woodall with the Georgia NAACP. Reverend Woodall, thank you for joining us tonight, first of all.
Thank you, Sean, for having me. I'm grateful to join you tonight.
We appreciate it. The Georgia NAACP called today's election a total failure. Who is responsible for this, in your opinion? Because the Secretary of State says it's not his.
Well, we believe that what we are witnessing is a complete travesty, and full accountability in this failure lies primarily with the Secretary of State and other state officials. We have shared in months past several challenges that face the state and its voters, and none of those were recognized. And therefore, coming into today, we knew that this was going to happen because the Secretary of State's office failed to do its job.
Fulbaum, it's good to talk to you, sir. Thanks for being here. What actions are you hoping for in light of today's problems, this morning's problems, as we prepare for the runoff in August 11th, and then the general election this coming November?
Well, we know a few things. One, there's a bill currently being considered in General Assembly, Senate Bill 463, which the Georgia NAACP opposes. And we testified back in January about this bill, but we're seeing the evidence of that bill and that kind of conversation and strategy about shifting the responsibility for the kinds of severe problems that we witness today to the local county boards of election. We know that the counties were not prepared. They did not have machines. They didn't have adequate testing. They didn't have the kind of training to prepare poll workers. And so we need a standard statewide uniformity so that we can ensure that elections that happen here in Georgia is reminiscent of the kind of legacy that Georgia deserves.
And Reverend Woodall, this injunction is not an overnight solution. What is the time frame do you hope to see the Senate Bill 463, which you oppose? Do you see the results for that and really the results for tonight? Because there were people who had waited in line, some reportedly for 4 hours. They wanted resolution right then and right there.
Right, and what some of the Secretary of State's office have shared to many voters. We had one voter who had done everything to get an absentee ballot, and the Secretary of State's office told him, I'm sorry, there's just simply nothing we can do. If you as a voter does everything that you are supposed to do by the law, and then the Secretary of State's office failed to do its job, you disenfranchise hundreds of thousands of people. And so one of the efforts that we are encouraging is that people stay in line if you are voting in person so that you can ensure that your vote is counted. For those who did not have the ability to vote due to the mismanagement of the Secretary of State's office, then we encourage you to call our voter protection hotline at 866 Our Vote. It's a nonpartisan line where we are detailing every single instance of failure on the part of the state. And so those are our two immediate questions or immediate resolutions that we are putting forth, but we're going to be looking at a long-term solution to ensure that November this does not happen again.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Sean.
In your press release, you mentioned that you felt that this was voter suppression. How do you challenge those individuals who had to go to work, took time out of their day, that waited in line, were not able to vote, and walked away in disgust. How do you get them to not give up on the process of having the right to go vote and encourage them to participate in the general election that's coming in November?
What we tell them is that though voting is important, it's simply not sufficient. And what we have seen for the last 14, 15, 16 days is the level of uprising that this country is so needing right now in this moment. And one of the tools that we do have at our disposal to resolve some of the challenges that we're facing when it comes to police brutality and racism and white supremacy is simply, we got to show up to vote. And so when people show up to vote and they are denied the right to vote, that means that we as organizers and activists and public leaders have to resolve to stand up in the face of these state officials, hold them accountable, and use our ability to sound the alarm, if you will, to require there be immediate action and relief.
Reverend, I got to ask you, though, because the term voter suppression, it's so loaded. And of course, it talks about a dark, ugly history here in the United States. Do you think that there was something nefarious going on with this? Or do you think, as we've heard from some local officials, that it was just a combination of a lot of factors with the new machines and the untrained workers and the COVID-19 and all of that? Is it just sort of the perfect storm of events that led to these issues? Or do you are you accusing someone of something nefarious in order to suppress minority voting in Atlanta?
Well, one, it's not just Atlanta. This is a statewide issue. And two, I think regardless if there was a nefarious intent or not, the impact is real. And what we are experiencing is widespread voter suppression, because when you have voters who are duly registered and allowed to vote are turned away from the ballot box and not able to cast their vote and raise their voice through the democratic process, regardless if somebody was intentional or not, that is voter suppression. And so we have to be able to hold each and every official accountable. We need them to stand up right now in this moment and require there be immediate action to resolve this. Because I guarantee you, there will be actions taken in the coming days that raise the voice of those who were refused to be heard today. And we're going to march on this state, and we're going to march right down to the Secretary of State's office and the Georgia General Assembly and demand that they do something about this, because this is simply unacceptable.
Well, Reverend Woodall, we're going to hold you to your word and make sure we follow you as you try to fight for the right for those who were not able to vote today. Thank you for your time. CBS 46's Harry Samler. He's monitoring the big board for Georgia's U.S. Senate race. And Harry, we aren't seeing many results right now. Some of the polls aren't even closed.
Well, we're surprised to get anything in. Well, we're surprised to get anything in at this point. But if you take a look here at the board right now, what we were hoping to do is, as the results came in, we were hoping that maybe we would be able to fill some of these in and show you who got what. We do have 1% of the vote coming in, but it's not specific right now. So we don't know exactly which county this is coming from. But this is one of those cases where we literally just printed this out just a couple of minutes ago. And again, this is only 1%. Only 1% of the vote right now. But if you look on here, we've been focusing on three candidates: John Ossoff, Teresa Tomlinson, former mayor of Columbus, and Sarah Riggs Amico. And you can already see here right at the top, 38% of the votes going to John Ossoff with 1,484 votes. And then it's kind of what we expected so far. In second place, Teresa Tomlinson with 669 votes and 17%. And then you go down here to Sarah Riggs Amico with 15% of the vote. But again, it's such a tiny number right here. I mean, this literally could be just one county reporting, and the question is, which county is it? But we're going to keep an eye on things, and hopefully, as more comes in, we'll get a better idea of where this is going.
All right, thank you, Harry. John Ossoff and Teresa Tomlinson and Sarah Riggs Amico, they are facing off today, the Democratic primary. They hope to face Republican David Perdue this November. Let's go to CBS 46's Brittany Miller, who is monitoring John Ossoff's campaign. And Brittany, he's expected to give some type of speech, just not with a lot of people around him.
Yeah, he was talking to me via Zoom. He's talking to other media outlets the same way. He's supposed to talk to us sometime later tonight, depending on what comes of those results. But during our interview today, he spent much of that time talking about the primary polling chaos that we've really seen all day, using words like disgusted and outraged, saying, quote, heads need to roll at the county and state level for what he called voter suppression. He also had a message for voters. I'll paraphrase what his quote was, saying that we have an obligation to ourselves and to our country and future generations not to be deterred, that if they don't want us to vote, we will stand in line for 6 hours to ensure that we have our rights upheld. Ossoff says if he wins tonight's primary and goes on to defeat David Perdue, he will champion a new Civil Rights Act as well as a new Voting Rights Act to make sure that people are held accountable. A couple of other nuggets that I just want to throw out there that I discussed with him today. He says that he is prepared to win a runoff. We know that can happen August 11th, depending on, again, what happens with those results tonight. He also told me, and I found out with his press person, that he was able to raise $3.58 million as of May 20th. As we know, he had a historic fundraising contribution last year in 2017 with $23 million. And I did ask him if the runoff from 2017 scarred him in any way, if he had any lessons that he learned. He said not to listen to the haters and not to listen to the critics, and that is what he is taking with him this year in 2020. So of course we'll have to see what happens, and of course I'll check in with him in the coming hours. Sean and Rick.
Wow, the haters. He speaks to the language millennials. He's trying to get them out to vote. Thank you, Brittany. I appreciate that.
He's the same age as they are, I think. CBS 46's Haley Mason is live in Columbus tonight. That's at Teresa Tomlinson's campaign headquarters, and I know she is cautiously optimistic heading into tonight that she's going to have a ticket out of here and hopefully a place on the ballot on August 11th, right, Haley?
Yes, we're back to back coming after Jon Ossoff's campaign report from Brittany, and Teresa Tomlinson tells me she sees this as a two-person campaign right now against Ossoff as they both look to unseat incumbent Senator David Perdue. Right now, Tomlinson is a former mayor of Columbus, 8 years in office. And I talked to her on qualifying day. She said she felt that she was the most qualified to lead because she was touting that she was the only person out of her opponents who's actually won an election before, the only person who's actually served in elected office, making tough decisions for her constituents. You can see on our live stream right now, she is on her Facebook Live communicating with voters, hoping to connect with more people who have been going through these voting problems all across the state. Of course, Columbus has not been immune to some of these problems, but they have not been as widespread as we've seen in Atlanta, where Tomlinson has been trying to bridge that gap between Columbus and Atlanta. I did speak with her about some of the problems that she's been seeing, and she said she is concerned about some of the difficulty in simply voting.
We want a fair representation of the voters' intent of who they want their Democratic nominee to be. And so every time I see these long lines, 5, 6 hours, some people are waiting, gravely concerned.
And Tomlinson was the first woman mayor in the history of Columbus. And right now, her name has resonated to Atlanta, even with some celebrities like T.I. and Ludacris and Ice Cube and Atlanta singer Usher Raymond all endorsing her today. She's asking voters who do support her to please stay in line, voters across the board rather, to please stay in line despite what is happening tonight. We are expecting late results to come in as some precincts are closing at 8 and 9 o'clock. And as we just heard, the NAACP is pushing for Gwinnett County to stay open until 10 p.m. We're expecting a long night, and we'll keep you posted here on our live stream. Reporting live in Columbus, Haley Mason, CBS 46 News.
Thank you, Haley.
Let's get back to CBS 46's Alicia Roberts. Alicia, you're live in Austell. There's been some long lines there, but have seen some improvement out there in Cobb County.
A little bit of improvement. That's right, Sean. That is the hope right now. But the lines continue. I want you to take a look right now. This is one of 19 precinct locations in Cobb County that had to extend their hours by 1 hour. So instead of closing at 7, they're closing at 8 o'clock, and that's due to voter issues. Some of these precincts, including this one here in Austell, opened late today due to issues. And we talked about some of those issues, including new voting machines, getting those standards in place during a pandemic. I want to talk to one of the voters who just cast her vote here in Austell. Can you say your name for those just joining us?
Shanitra Ashby.
And you voted at this precinct location before, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, describe how it was like today. Were the lines, how long did you wait in line?
2.5 hours.
And you voted here before. Was that line longer than what you've experienced before?
Yes, it was.
Okay. When you got inside, tell me about the process. Did it seem organized? Did you feel like you the folks inside, were able to manage the crowd today?
I felt like they managed it as well as they could.
What that means. Did you see them sanitizing machines in between?
I did see them sanitizing equipment. And
when you arrived today, were you surprised to see the lines as long as you did?
Yes, I was.
What do you say to folks that are out here today for the primary and maybe election officials that are watching this, knowing that this is a primary, right? And turnout has been strong. Do we need more voting machines at this location come November?
I think we need more voting machines. I think we need more locations to vote at. And I just want to tell everyone that is waiting in line, continue to wait in line. It's worth it. Cast your vote. Cast your vote.
Was it more important today to come out? Today was George Floyd's funeral with everything that's been going on in our country over the last 2 weeks. Did it make today more significant?
It does. It does. It does.
And I see you've got some snacks in your hands here. People have been in pretty good spirits despite the fact that we've had some downpours and long lines. Talk about some of the volunteers that you encountered while you voted today.
They were all nice. They were very helpful. At one point it started raining. They passed out ponchos, so it was great.
So you feel like those that were out here today wanted to make sure those that came to vote got their votes counted?
Yes, they did.
All right. Thank you so much, Deetra. I appreciate you taking a couple of minutes with us on this rainy Tuesday night. Behind my shoulder, those are the volunteers, the ladies that are out tonight passing out some popsicles, waters, snacks to make sure the crowds have what they need. Again, here in Austell, lines are still out and about, but if you were in line by 8 o'clock, your vote will be counted tonight. So we'll be here throughout the night monitoring the crowds and the conditions. We'll send it back to you in the meantime.
All right. Thank you, Alicia. Let's bring back our political analysts, Elena Rains and Carly Swift.
And let's talk about this general election, because obviously everybody's focused on the primary and then the runoffs that'll come in August. But let's just look ahead to November, because there are so many polls this week that talk about how opinions are beginning to shift. And depending on which poll you look at, and I guess we should say off the bat that the polls have been dead wrong in the past, but that's really all we have to go on right now. It looks like a lot of the suburban women who may have supported President Trump back in 2016 in some of the areas outside of downtown Atlanta, that those women and some of those other reliable Republican constituencies are having second thoughts about the president this time around. Elena, what are you hearing along those lines?
Yeah, so we actually sometimes refer to Congressional District 7 as the swing suburban district. That Republican strategy right now is to appeal and to bring back those suburban women that have left the party. These are mothers. And so when they saw Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd being killed, like that really impacted them. And so Republicans are going to have to try a little bit harder to nudge them back to the Republican side, because right now they're aligning more with a lot of the Democratic candidates. And when we're talking about criminal justice reform and just really moving the needle with a lot of policies with that law enforcement are traditionally, tactics that law enforcement traditionally use that have not been human. And so, that actually shifts us more towards the DA races and the local sheriff races. And so they'll be paying attention to those judicial races that traditionally maybe they're not paying as much attention to, but now they're going to hold their feet to the fire. They really want to see that we shift in a direction of systemic change.
Speaking of that shift, I'll ask you this, Carly. Where are these women going? Are they leaving the Republican Party and becoming what many want Georgia to become, purple? Do you see possible flip-flopping, leaving the Republican Party altogether and casting votes for Democrats that would not have even been possible before COVID-19 or the George Floyd riots that happened and protests? And then you add to that, some of the behavior of our president that some women have really been, if you look at critics, have been repulsed by.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. I actually think we've been seeing this shift in Republican suburban women since 2016. Hillary Clinton won several counties in Georgia purely because of the number of suburban women that voted for her. And I think so that shift started in 2016, and I think it is continuing. And it'll be interesting to see how effective the candidates on the statewide level, national candidates, are at converting those women into voters. And it's possible that those voters will become Democrats. It's also possible that they will vote against what they see on a national level as a president that feeds division and is not supportive of what they really want in America, the America that they think that we have. And so, I think we'll have to look. It'll be interesting to see specifically if we look at the Congressional District 7 and 6 and see the demographics, how the demographics come out when we actually are able to see those votes. So more to come. We're not in the prediction business, but we definitely think that there is a trend where those voters are definitely moving towards Democratic voters.
Time will tell soon. All right, I appreciate that, ladies. We'll come back to you, Carly Swift and Elena Rains. But first, let's go back out to those protests. They are still happening in downtown Atlanta during Election Day. Let's go to CBS 46's Astrid Martinez. Astrid, you're live downtown. You've been talking to protesters about election night, and they've been very vocal with you.
Yeah, they have. They're telling me that the work that they do in the streets also has to match the work that they do at the voting poll. And I'm here with John. You're an activist. You've been living in Atlanta for several years now, right?
Yes.
Originally from Nashville. You were here since the very first day. Tell me a little bit about that day and what it sparked in you to start organizing marches throughout the week.
On that day, I seen that it was very disorganized, unorganized, and I knew that we had not many political leaders out there. So as an activist, I felt compelled to help the people. So on the next day, I kind of got it a little bit organized with a group of other people who were willing to say, let's get this as an organization versus a riot. So that was the main deal.
And you've been organizing marches ever since. And I know I was in one several days ago, and it led from Centennial to the MLK Memorial Site to Ponce to back here. Why are those, to you, more beneficial? Why are those successful?
Those areas are very significant. When we leave from ground zero, it's pretty much making a mark when we go to the next spot. So I use MLK site because it had a significance. I went to Ponce City Market because it had a significance, and those people needed to hear us. So they heard us, and we had a couple of people go to the state capitol to make complaints, which was a good thing, and here we are today.
I know, like 11 days later, 10 days later.
Right.
I also know that sometimes it's difficult. You have some issues with the media, right? Depending on what they're covering or what they're seeing, if people are really involved in organizing marches or they're not. Why is that crucial information to know for the audience and for us journalists too?
Because for the people who are on the front line, including the activists and including the protesters and demonstrators, it is very, very important to know that we've taken the shots from the tear gas and the paintball guns, and they haven't covered that at all as much as we anticipated because people need to see it. And that goes for the political leaders. They only come out when it's conducive for them, not us.
So you've been out here since day one at the front lines, taking the insults or taking, the gas, the tear gas, and you're saying like some people try to come in late minute and say that they organized all this and taking the credit for what the activists have been doing here in Atlanta.
Yes, that's correct.
And that divides the community and it causes. Tell me what that causes for you guys.
For a lot of people that don't know, it makes the activists look kind of crazy. And for the people who do know, stand 100% behind the activists versus the political powers.
Now, since you're an activist and you're garnered so many youth in the last couple of days, not the last couple of days, a handful of days, I've seen kids, come out in all different kinds of numbers. Do you want that same passion to translate at the voting booth? Do you think those two need to be combined?
Exactly, and I do. I've been out here for 3 days teaching people how to register, especially the little kids, for the future. Because if they don't know, they'll just be unheard. You know, people go to the voting polls without registering, thinking their vote will count, and it doesn't. So I teach people how to register, when to register, and where to go.
Did you vote today?
I did vote today.
Okay, cool. I did too.
Cool.
Thank you so much, John. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you. And continue you organizing out here. I know that it's energized me and so many other people, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
So as you hear from the activists themselves, the ones that are here setting up all these incredible marches, it's important to combine these two efforts to really make a change, guys.
Astrid, thanks very much. We'll check back with you in a bit. Stacey Abrams is not on any ballot today. You remember she came very close to winning the gubernatorial race. She lost to Brian Kemp by a hair. She then went on to find an organization founded called Fair Fight Action, which is an organization that fights voter suppression. And she's holding a virtual press conference right now with members of that group. She's talking about some of the events that we've seen unfolding today at the polls here in Georgia. Let's take a listen. Of course, she's not talking right now. There are other people in this virtual press conference, and I'm guessing that she's listening to somebody. You know, Stacey Abrams' name has been mentioned as a possible running mate for Vice President Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee for president. She has been very vocal about actually campaigning for the job of vice president, something that a lot of political analysts have said that we don't see that very often. People are usually a little bit sort of more discreet when they want the job. But she has been lobbying front and center, and she's really had a very vocal presence during this run-up to this primary. Again, and she is holding this virtual press conference right now. We'll keep our eye on that, and we'll take you back to the press conference if anything interesting comes from it. But first, let's check in once again with CBS 46's Carolyn Ryan, who's talking to us more about some of the issues that we have seen at the polls tonight. Carolyn, what's going on where you are?
Hi there. Yeah, I'm at a polling precinct in Fulton County off of Hank Aaron Drive, and I just want to show you the status right now, checking in at 8:45 p.m. of the line here. You can see it kind of snakes around, goes all the way down this sidewalk here, around that back fence, through the grass here. But the good news, Rick, let me show you. See the guy in the green shirt? He is the last one in line. Beyond about 30 minutes ago when I was live with you, the line actually snaked all the way around, out the gate, down the sidewalk, down the street there. So it has improved pretty significantly, and that's the good news. I did speak with somebody here who had just voted earlier. She said the line was the worst part. Once she got inside, it ran pretty smoothly. She said she really didn't encounter any issues there. Obviously, though, there were issues all over Georgia, the state of Georgia, specifically Metro Atlanta and Fulton and DeKalb counties earlier today, right? We've heard a lot about that, seen a lot about that online as well with regard to these new voting machines. Well, I wanted to find out, well, what's the issue with the voting machines? Well, what is it specifically? Did the machines malfunction? Did they not work as they thought that they would? Or was this a user operator error? Well, I went directly to the person who orchestrated and oversaw the rollout of the new voting machines with the Secretary of State's office. His name is Gabriel Sterling. And first I asked him, what was your reaction? You woke up this morning, you started seeing all the reports, you checked online, you started hearing that there were all these issues. What was your reaction? We'll take a listen to what he said.
Heart didn't sink a little. It was a mixture of frustration, anger, and disappointment all in one time, because a lot of these things could have been avoided if there had been some more thought put into it on the front end. And then again, the training side of this. It's just very difficult to deploy anything this big, and Fulton's a big county. I know they have several issues. I know that they have a lot of territory to cover, and it's difficult, but they've been given $15 million by their county commission. The state has given them everything they asked for, and they seem to just continually have issues like this. I was looking back, and they have issues every election cycle, unfortunately.
So Gabrielle Sterling with the Secretary of State's office calling out specifically Fulton County. They're saying they've been plagued with issues for years with elections. And he said really it came down to training. These counties didn't properly train the poll workers before today. Obviously, that's a big problem. They're going to address that. Now, we are waiting to hear from Fulton County election officials, waiting to hear what they have to say in response to this. And, was it an issue of training? Did they, how are they kind of breaking down the issues today? We know that the Secretary of State's office has launched an investigation into what happened. We know also the Georgia House of Representatives, Speaker Ralston, has also announced he would be investigating this as well. So a lot more to come on this. It's 8:45. Polls will be open at least until 9:30 here in Fulton County. All these folks will ultimately make it through. Huge turnout today, huge interest. Before anyone even stepped foot in the polling locations today, already over 1 million Georgians had cast votes in this primary election. Back to you.
All right, Carolyn, thanks. We'll check back with you in a bit. Let's go back to Stacey Abrams' virtual press conference. She is speaking right now. Let's take a listen.
A provision that would formally, essentially abdicate responsibility from the Secretary of State. What we saw happening today, all day, with the Secretary of State pointing to the counties as the bad actors, taking credit for the good that was done. What he intends to do with this legislation is to essentially exempt the state from its responsibility to work with the counties to execute elections. And we know that it is the state's responsibility, which is why they're trying to put into law that they do not have that obligation any longer. In addition, the language would also add an ID requirement for absentee ballots. This would make it more onerous. And the way it's worded, it's an option, but it will become the de facto rule, because essentially it says, if you don't give us your ID, we will have a reason to reject your ballot. And in a time of COVID-19, the deep worry is going to be that people are going to think they have to include a copy of their driver's license and their ID in their absentee ballot process. That will stop some people from participating through absentee ballots at all. It's particularly concerning for senior citizens who will be privy to identity theft. But the larger challenge is that it adds another layer to a process that does not suffer from fraud, it suffers from execution. And by making it even more onerous to participate and vote by mail, we're going to see more people in line, we're going to see longer lines, and we're going to see a further collapse of our system. And so the third opportunity that could be in this bill but is not, is creating vote centers in every county. We know that there are going to be what we saw today, which is that precincts, the polling places are going to close, they may move. There is no notification process that is uniform across the state. There is no provision for voting centers, which essentially operate the same way early voting does today. A few places in each county, particularly in our larger counties, so that people can go and cast their ballots using the same technology that we currently have in place for early voting. We're not asking for a lot of them, but we are asking for a sufficient number so that if something happens at a precinct, that instead of someone having to hunt around to find out where they should vote at the last minute, having waited 5 hours in line, that there is a place they know they can go no matter what to vote in person. Those are some of the things that can be put in place in SB 463, and we're going to be working very hard, hopefully, to move the state towards improving elections so that we do not see this play out again on a grander scale in November.
Thank you. And I just wanted to note that Verified Action CEO Lauren Growargo has joined the call. And our next question will be from Annie Grayer from CNN. Annie, your line is now unmuted.
Okay.
Hi, Leader Abrams. This is
You've been listening to Stacey Abrams' virtual press conference, taking questions from the media, including CNN and local media here in Georgia. She's been discussing events of today's primary. We'll try to monitor that and keep you posted on the details that come out of that. Meanwhile, you're looking at the bottom of your screen, updated Senate results. Jon Ossoff, Teresa Tomlinson, and Sarah Riggs Amico facing off today on the Democratic Party primary. They hope to face Republican David Perdue this November. Right now, Ossoff leading with 38% of the vote. Tomlinson has 17% of the vote, and right now we have 4% of precincts reporting. Actually, Riggs Amico now has 15% of the vote. We'll continue to monitor that and post it throughout the rest of the streaming newscast. All right, let's get back to CBS 46's Alicia Roberts. Alicia, you've been in Austell. There have been some serious issues in Cobb County. One of them, which was very easy to notice, was social distancing, at least at that precinct, was completely thrown out the window.
Yeah, that's right, Sean. So a lot of folks that came to vote today did bring their masks. A lot of them, though, had to really hunker down under cover, what limited cover there was, because we did have some extensive downpours today. I did put my umbrella down. The rain has let up just a bit here. I want you to look inside. Most of the voters now are inside. There's about a 30-minute wait for those folks that are able to gather inside. But to your point about social distancing, perhaps not ideal conditions here. This is one of 19 precincts in Cobb County that had to stay open an extra hour due to voter issues that happened earlier today. I want to bring in David Johnson. David, we talked to you earlier tonight when you were waiting in line. So tell me, from start to finish, how long did you wait in line to cast your ballot here today?
I got it about 5:30, and I was able to cast my vote around 9 o'clock.
9
Right
o'clock.
at 9.
So that's 3.5 hours.
Yes, exactly.
Is that okay?
It was long, but it's worth the wait.
What do you say to Cobb County officials who have you out here waiting for 3.5 hours to cast your ballot?
They need to get it together, make it a little quicker.
Okay. So right now there are 10 machines inside. Would you say that's enough?
No, they did to double that, 20 at least.
Okay. Once inside, you actually did say it was fairly efficient.
20 minutes, about 20 minutes once we got inside.
20 minutes to get inside, essentially over 3 hours just to get to that process.
Yes, to wait in line about 2.5 hours. Once you got in, about 20 to 30 minutes to catch the vote.
And you voted at this precinct before?
Yes, I have.
Better, worse?
No, it's much worse. It's much worse.
So to county officials that are out there listening to this tonight, we talked to one inside that said, hey, expect glitches, expect long lines. Is that excuse okay with you?
Well, they've had a long time to get together, and so every time we have a big election, it's like this, so I think they need to do better.
And there are a lot of people that are still waiting in line right now. What do you say to those folks that are out there braving the long lines, braving the rain that we saw today?
Just hang in there. Your vote is worth it. I mean, it's worth it. I mean, we got a lot going on right now, so it's well worth it.
A lot going on right now.
Yes,
David Johnson, thank you so much. I will tell you, we've met some of the nicest people out here. The volunteers are out handing out bottled water and snacks for those that have come out to vote here. We're going to continue to monitor conditions. Ballots still to be cast here in Austell. Long lines, lots of rain, lots of delays has been the story here in Cobb County so far. We'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Alicia. Let's bring our political analysts, Elena Rains and Carly Swift.
And Carly, let's start. We're going to wrap up this hour. I want to get some final thoughts from both of you as we sort of summarize what we've seen so far. Some voter issues at the polls earlier, some lawsuits, some injunctions filed, races too close to call. What are you watching right now over the next couple of hours? What do you think we're going to learn?
Well, I hope that we are going to start to actually see more results come in, and we're going to figure out where those results, what counties are reporting, so we have a better idea of actually what the demographics look like. I think we're not going to answer the big question of the night, which is why were the elections so bad? Why were county election boards so unprepared? Why was the state unprepared? We're not going to learn that until the investigation actually starts. So I think I want to start to shift to look at the results so we can figure out what trends are we seeing, and if there are any upsets, because there might be. This has already been a very unconventional election, and so looking forward to really learning more and about who wins and who the winners are and who the losers are.
All right, Elena, what about you? Some final thoughts, and what do you think the headlines are going to be a couple of hours from now?
Oh, those are going to be very interesting. I think similarly to Carly, I'm interested to see just how the polls turn out and the election results. I think it is unfortunate that the actual election was overshadowed by all of the events and the chaos that happened tonight. I'm hoping that voters walk away with this more encouraged and inspired to really push those elected officials to be more transparent and accountable. And if they don't, then vote them out. and vote someone else in, and just to start to be more engaged, because this cannot happen again. So I'm excited to see the results. I'm excited to move forward, but I also think we should remember this time in history and use it to, really elevate what's happening in the state of Georgia and the entire country.
Ladies, we have about 2 minutes left, and I'm going to ask you one final question. Both of you chime in so we can get it in. But what's your gut feeling telling you about this election when it comes to those returns in Fulton County? Slow, fast, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow? Or are we talking about with the mayor's race, you didn't see him for several days?
Well, I don't think that we're going to get results for Fulton County, DeKalb tonight. I suspect, unfortunately, that with the extension of the polls, you're probably going to have people voting until late tonight. So, there's an outside chance that we will get some results in, but I suspect that we will not have a good idea about, especially some of these more contested races like the Fulton County DA, where there are multiple candidates that are viable candidates. We are not going to really probably know who the winners are if it's a runoff until tomorrow. Elena, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I definitely am really, again, excited to see what happens moving forward. And I am just really interested to see how the surplus of ballots impacts the next couple of days, right? So, we have outstanding roughly 600,000 ballots. These polls in Fulton County, some of them don't close until 10 p.m., which means voters have until 10 p.m. to get in line. So I don't foresee anything anytime soon. I'm going to say cautiously optimistic, but they do have 10 days, and unfortunately, it looks like they may take the full 10 days.
We will see. Elena Rains, Carly Swift will be staying with us, and we'll be checking back with you a little bit later on this evening. Ladies, thanks so much for your insight and your analysis. You have been watching this special coverage of Georgia's primary election.
And remember, you can get all of the results on CBS46.com or on the CBS 46 streaming app. CBS 46 News at 9 on Peachtree TV starts in just a few moments.
This is CBS 46 News at 9 on Peachtree TV. Getting results.
Breaking at 9 o'clock, polls across Fulton County finally closing. The county's Superior Court made the decision amid multiple complaints from voters concerning wait times and a lack of voting machines at some polling places.
More than a dozen polling locations across Cobb County also had extended hours due to voting issues earlier in the day. Polls at 19 different precincts closed at 8 o'clock.
2 Gwinnett County districts gave voters extra time to make their choice. People who vote at Beaver Ruin Baptist Church received an extra 14 minutes. Voters at an elementary school on Harrington Road in Lawrenceville, they got an extra 20 minutes. And voting issues across multiple metro Atlanta counties make the voting process longer and way more frustrating.
Team coverage begins tonight near Piedmont Park, where crowds of voters just began to thin. Adam Murphy is standing by with the latest on that. Last we talked to you, Adam, there were long lines behind you.
Well, good evening, Rick. Yeah, very long lines out here at Park Tavern, and they are not so bad, believe it or not, right now. Take a look. There are some people still standing outside. Those that are standing in line now will get to vote because the polls just closed at 9 o'clock, but they are in line. They will get to vote. One of the hot races on the ballot in Fulton County is the race for a Fulton County District Attorney. Now, I want to show you the 3 candidates that are up for this seat. Left to right, you have Paul Howard. He is the incumbent. Fonnie Willis, and then you also have Christian Wise Smith. Let me tell you about these 3 candidates. Paul Howard, on the far left there, he's been the DA for more than 2 decades. He is currently under GBI investigation for allegedly using nonprofit funds to supplement his salary. He has also been criticized lately for bringing charges against some Atlanta police officers involved in a tasing incident involving college students at a protest. Now, these issues have made it very difficult for his campaign right now, and that is why some believe there could be an upset. Let's talk about Fonnie Willis. She's a chief judge of South Fulton, Howard alum, Emory Law. She also worked in the private sector for a while and worked in the Fulton County District Attorney's Office under Paul Howard as an assistant DA. And there on the right, Christian Wise Smith. He said criminal justice system in Fulton County has not changed since 1997. He wants to focus more on serious crimes. And get this, he too worked for Fulton County DA Paul Howard. And this is what he had to say about tonight's race.
We have the opportunity right now to change our justice system for the first time ever in Fulton County. And I want to say for the first time ever in the South. I don't think there's a progressive DA anywhere in the South. So I'd be the first.
And Christian went on to say he hopes Paul Howard enjoys his retirement. He's that confident right now. I also reached out to Fonnie Willis. We had an interview scheduled with her at 8:30. That was pushed back. So she has not spoken yet. And we also asked Paul Howard to talk about this race. He said he was busy meeting with voters around Fulton County dealing with the voting issues today, has not agreed to do any interview. So this should be very interesting. We do not expect final results tonight. Obviously, with the polls here just now closing, it's going to be a long night, but it could be a very interesting race once it's all said and done. We're live in Fulton County in Atlanta at Park Tavern. Adam Murphy, CBS 46 News.
Good stuff, Adam. Thanks so much. Voting issues in Cobb County also keeping people out longer than they had expected when they left their homes to go vote today. CBS 46's Alicia Roberts continuing our team coverage tonight. And what's going on there, Alicia?
Well, Rick, here in Austell, voters are still waiting to cast their ballot. This was one of 19 precinct locations in Cobb County that were forced to stay open for an extra hour. Polls here were supposed to close at 7 o'clock. They stayed open till 8 o'clock at this location and 18 others due to voter issues earlier in the day. Some of those precinct locations, including this one here, having to open late. Want to bring in right now William Tanks. William, you're Public Services Director here in Cobb County, and we've talked to voters throughout the day. Lines up to 3-4 hours for folks having to vote. What do you say to those voters that were out here today? Why the long lines?
It's a combination of things. You can point at several different things, but if I was to sum up the more outstanding things, I would say, one, we're dealing with a pandemic. That requires a different approach to voting, social distancing, keeping people in certain places. Even our poll workers, we have to keep them at a certain distance. Also new equipment. We got new equipment that required some technical savvy, a few glitches. We had to call technical folks in, and we only have so many of them. Machine had to have a special code. It's just a slew of things. Printers, now we have printers. You know, a printer, you can power off a printer at your own home, and if it stops reading, now I don't have a printed out ballot. So when you add that up, the pandemic, new equipment, less voters, less poll workers because of the fear of the pandemic. You put all that together, you're going to have glitches, and that's what happened today. And so we would say to our voters, we understood that it may have been longer than usual, but we're glad that folks toughed it out and got their vote in, and we were able to allow them to do that.
Some are saying those are excuses. You've had months to prepare. What do you say to those?
Until you work as a poll worker, it's understandable because you're on that side, but I've seen it up front, close and personal, that excuses is when you don't make an effort. But we have poll workers, some of them are putting in 2 and 3 days with 4 and 5 hours of sleep. I mean, they can only do so much. A machine is a machine. If it's got a glitch in it, you can say abracadabra, do whatever you want to do, but if the machine doesn't work, there's nothing you can do to make it work. So you can call it an excuse, but it's just reality. The pandemic, who has control over that? Who can control a pandemic that we don't have medicine for or treatment for yet? That's not under our control. So yes, it may sound like excuses, but this is the reality. We have an unprecedented pandemic. We have new equipment. We have an effect on human beings, which are poll workers.
All right, and there were 10 machines that were working today. Will there be more in November for those that come out here in Austell?
That's a great question. I do not know if we're going to have different machines at different polling locations, but we are definitely going to learn from what we experienced this time. And if we can improve, that means more machines. That will be the case.
All right, that's the word here in Cobb County. About 100 or so folks still out in line waiting to make sure their votes will be cast. We'll be here throughout the night tracking it all. We'll send it back to you.
All right, thank you, Alicia. We are following breaking news right now. There is a Fulton County Board of Election. The head of the county is now speaking. Let's listen in.
There will be a lot of room for improvement when it comes to August and also November. We're going to bring in a consultant. The board and I have been talking about that for a couple of weeks since early on in during early voting. And I think that's going to be the best thing to do, especially when it comes to ballot by mail. Right now, I guess the best thing to do, since you got the statement that we released earlier, is I'm just going to take a few questions until I need to go over to Georgia World Congress Center and then to the Election Preparation Center.
Thank you, Mr. Barron, and thank you everyone again for your flexibility. If you just want to type in the comments, I will call on people in order and let Rick take a few questions, and we will we'll go ahead and get started. If if there's someone who I think you all can unmute yourselves. I don't see any questions in the chat. One thing I'd like to clarify, because I've had a few questions about it, is ask Rick to clarify which ballots are being counted at which location. I think many of you have visited us at the Georgia World Congress Center where we are counting absentee ballots. That is not where everything is being counted. So I'm just going to ask him while we're getting, while folks are, if you have any questions to ask Rick to just comment on that.
Yes, at the Georgia World Congress Center, we are counting all of the absentee ballots that we received. Through Sunday, we had received over 85,000, and then I believe today we received mail on Sunday, 2 different times from the Postal Service. So yesterday we didn't get any mail. And then today we received another more than almost 7,500. We will get ballots from the drop boxes tonight. Those were open until 9 o'clock once the poll hours were extended. And at the Election Preparation Center, all of the early votes will be tabulated. The votes actually for the absentee ballots by mail will be tabulated at the Election Preparation Center on English Street. However, they are all scanned and processed over at Georgia World Congress Center. That is a very big operation over there. In case if any of you have been over there, you'll see that there are more than 220 people at work over there to processing the over 90,000 absentee ballots that we received. Just to give you an idea of the difference between this primary this year, which is the general primary, we've received over 92,000 absentee ballots by mail. In the 2016 general primary, we only received 947 ballots. Okay, I can take questions.
All right, thank you, Rick. We have a question from Ben Brash at the AJC, and Ben, you can unmute yourself, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it. He said, what exactly went wrong today aside from backlog and new equipment? What specific things happened? And if there were multiples, please elaborate.
I think there were several things today that we can learn from. We had a number of poll workers that didn't show up in many precincts, and that is something that we feared that would happen. We had even 2 poll managers in the last couple of days that tested positive for COVID, so they couldn't work. I think one of the big challenges for us was that we had 45 polling place changes. That's something usually you won't see unless you're in a 2-year cycle. You might see that many polling place changes over that time period. The challenges of that is that we had to get, a lot of them happened. 44 of the 45 were directly due to COVID. We had to get out ahead of household mailing to announce those changes. We had to try to get those publicized out there in any way that we could, from next door through elected officials. And we had to make sure that voters knew where the new polling places, where their new polling places were. Because if you vote you vote anywhere other than your assigned precinct on election day, you have to vote a provisional ballot. That is one thing that happened at precincts around the county today, because many people were confused by all of the different polling place changes. We don't like to change polling places, but in the middle of this pandemic, we were faced with one polling place after another dropping out, and we dropped from 198 polling places down to 164. We were able to combine a number, and so that's why the 45 that changed reduced our polling location numbers down to 34. We also lost a lot of poll workers. We had a lot of new poll workers in the field today. One of the other things that happened was that this was brand new equipment. The last time the poll workers were trained for the March presidential preference primary between January and March. Their in-person training was in those months. Since then, we haven't been able to do in-person training. That we did some refreshers in the last few days, but people did not want to attend in-person training at the height of the concern over the pandemic in March, April, and into May. We would have lost more poll workers had we done in-person training because people weren't comfortable with it. That was another challenge that we had. So we had to do video training, we had to do webinars, and then we did demos during supply pickup, and we also did, for those poll workers that were interested in coming in person, we did do trainings that way. So what that did by having all of those trainings occur is through video, is you don't get your hands on the equipment. So a lot of poll workers were confused this morning in many different precincts about several different things. Our call center was overloaded with calls from poll workers that had issues.
How many precincts have all had issues? I don't mean to interrupt. How many
that ranged
had issues?
all the way across the spectrum. I think some of the other things, we did have equipment issues. We had scanners that would power down, jammed. We also had, in some cases, polling or ballot marking devices plugged into the one circuit. Maybe there were too many plugged into one circuit, and so that would cause some of them to flicker. We were having to get technicians out there. We had more than 90 technicians hired for this election that were either roving around or assigned to specific precincts. And those are some of the issues that we saw. It was mostly equipment issues, many caused by different training challenges that we had.
Thank you, Rick, for that. Ben, hopefully we answered your questions. Next question we have is from WABE, A Closer Look, wants to know, Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger says it's Fulton County's fault. Is it? I'm not sure what that means. Follow-up question from WABE, Secretary of State says he's investigating Fulton County. Have we heard from him directly, and will, Rick wants to know, will you cooperate with an investigation?
We haven't heard from the Secretary of State directly, no. Whenever a county is whenever an investigation of a county opens up, whenever a voter initiates a complaint with the Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State's office has a team of investigators. They investigate every complaint that comes in. So whenever the first complaint comes in, an investigation is opened. It is terminology that is used by the Secretary of State's office. Whether it is, look, all I'm doing is looking forward to finishing the job of this election and looking forward to seeing what we can do better going forward. Whatever Secretary Raffensperger's opinion is, it's his opinion alone, and he can say whatever he wants. I disagree with him. I think he's the head election official in the state, and he can't wash his hands of all the responsibility for this election. So that's pretty much where I'll leave that question.
Thank you, Rick. Next question from Ben again, who wants to know how this today's events, I guess, fit into the history of Fulton County's election hiccups, or is this something different?
Well, I think it's a little of both. I mean, obviously this election posed some problems for us that No other election, I think 2012, we haven't seen anything like this since 2012 in terms of issues on election day. And, you know, it's not uncommon to have a few precincts here and there have issues, but this hit us in many different fronts, from absentee by mail to election day. During early voting, we had to reduce the number of early voting sites that we had. We had processed more than 143,000 absentee ballot applications. That is four times or 4.5 times the amount of a normal presidential election. It stretched us thin as far as staffing goes. We got behind, of course, in April with the head of the absentee ballot coming down with COVID, and then one of his chief staff members dying from COVID. So we got behind in April. We had 6 of the first 9 days where we were processing when we got behind, and that set us off on the wrong foot. It took us a long time to catch up, but we did. And you know, what I want to do is thank all the voters that did participate in this election. We are going to look exactly at everything that happened in this election and go forward. And we will make sure that in November, we serve the voters of this county with distinction.
Thank you, Rick. Next question is, what would you say to voters who may be worried about November?
Well, I think what we're going to have to do for November is, regardless of where we are in terms of the pandemic, we are going to have to open all of our early voting sites. If we need to open 24 early voting sites and have another 15 outreach sites, we're just going to have to do that to take the pressure off of election day and also take the pressure off of the absentee by mail process. The absentee by mail process, it was an election in and of itself. You know, you have states out there in the West that do ballot by mail professionally. That is what they do. Their elections are almost exclusively by mail. They have no polling sites. They have no early voting. They do it by mail. What we were asked to do was do absentee by mail. We became an absentee by mail state. We still had to do our full complement of election day infrastructure. We did our early voting infrastructure, and it stretched us. We tried to face those challenges, and I think, you know, when you have the offices that are closed, you're managing people teleworking from homes all over the county. We ran into a lot of challenges this time. So I think we are going to learn from this and move forward.
Thank you, Rick. I think we're going to take one or two more questions. We have one here from Faith. Says, is it true that Georgia's absentee ballots were processed and mailed by Runbeck from Arizona as contracted by the Secretary of State on April 25th, and the counties were only responsible for processing the applications and not mailing them until last week?
Yeah, the Secretary of State's office, what the process was that the Secretary of State's office mailed out the absentee ballot applications to voters originally. Now, I don't know to which counties, the voters in each county received their applications at different times. I don't know where Fulton was with regard to that order and when our voters received those applications in comparison to others, but I know that sometime around April 6th, April 5th, April 6th, a lot of Fulton voters started receiving their absentee ballot applications in the mail. The voters would then send them by email to us or send them through mail. The vast majority of them came via mail. Then once we processed them, Runbeck out of Arizona would mail those. They started mailing them on April 21st. And the last processing day for the counties was May 28th. So and then whatever was processed on May 28th Runbeck would then mail, and I think they got the last of those out on either 6/1 or 6/2. The counties then took over mailing from the applications they started receiving on May 29th, and then mailed out the final week. And so we were responsible for the last week to mail out those ballots.
All right, we have been listening to Richard Barron. He is with the Fulton County Board of Elections, admitting today, Sean, that mistakes were made. He said, we're going to learn from our mistakes. We're going to move on. He talked about a number of different measures that they plan to put in place before the general election in November. One of them includes hiring a consultant to come in and try to help out. He also talked about opening up more early voting locations so that people who want to vote early, and there seemed to be a lot of interest in that this cycle, will be able to do that in more locations.
There were a lot of concerns, especially on social media, and even coming from Fair Fight Georgia, which is Stacey Abrams' organization, including former Mayor Kasim Reed, our current mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, that there were possibly, on social media, this could have been a result of suppression. But according to the Fulton County Board of Elections top head, he admits that there were some serious issues that this election, this primary election, stressed us. It really hit them from many different fronts. For example, the board confirms that there were training challenges that created voting delays. 2 poll managers did not show up for election today because they tested positive for COVID-19. 44 of the 45 polling places in Fulton County were changed because poll workers had to train via video, and they couldn't train in person, so that's why some of them were not adept on how to work the voting machines. And also the reason why they had to train by video is because there were concerns about COVID-19. Also the sheer numbers of people, this unprecedented turnout. Richard Barron says over 92,000 absentee ballots were received by Fulton County compared to 947 that were processed back in 2016. It is a story that we're going to continue to follow, but he admits that there were flaws with the election here in Fulton County, and the problem falls square on Fulton County's shoulders, at least some of it. All right, we're going to switch gears. Rain also posed a problem for some, but Ella, lines were long, but folks still waited to get out there and vote.
Now, CBS 46 Pinpoint Weather, certified Atlanta's most accurate forecast.
You know what, Sean? I heard a lot of people say that at their precincts there was people handing out umbrellas, handing out ponchos. So even in the rain, people came together to support each other through voting. And that is just kind of incredible, the way we have a community in that way. But yeah, tropical rain still occurring in northwest Georgia from Dawson County up through Rabun County. The mountains seeing heavy rain, Fannin County as well. Lake Rabun, Lake Burton, getting very wet right now. Even Lake Lanier seeing very heavy rain. So yeah, if you live in Gainesville, if you live up through the mountains, pretty brutal right now if you're still trying to vote. Here's the good news. It does look like the rain is slowly tapering. So it will end through the overnight hours, but we're actually going to see a lot more of it tomorrow. And this is actually all the remnants of what's left over from Tropical Depression Cristobal. So we kind of are feeling it outside. You know, it feels super tropical. The air is very thick and humid. That's going to be the case overnight. Showers continue until midnight, and then that rain will taper. Cloudy skies overnight. Here's a look. There's where Cristobal is. It's way up in Lake Michigan. Pretty incredible. An associated cold front will get going overnight, and that cold front will pass through our area tomorrow night. So until then, we're going to see these scattered thunderstorms spark up as early as tomorrow morning. Not going to be widespread severe weather tomorrow, but on and off showers throughout the day with tropical rainfall is likely. So very similar to today. It will be very humid. Feels like temperatures in the 90s tomorrow afternoon, actual temperatures in the 80s. Tomorrow night at this time, the front passes through. What that means is dry air starts to work its way in. And by the time we wake up on Thursday, it will feel like a completely different season outside. So much lower humidity, not a cloud in the sky. So one more day of this really heavy, nasty tropical rain, and then almost no rain through the end of the weekend. In fact, Atlanta's most accurate forecast, 7-day, looking really nice. And guess what? temperatures in the mid 80s across the board, no 90s. I think that's something that we can all get on board for. You can go ahead and make some outdoor plans for this weekend.
Thanks for making CBS 46 the fastest growing news in Atlanta.
Back to election news in a moment, but first, all new at 9, the Netflix series Space Force trademarked its name before the U.S. military could.
The series stars Steve Carell and is a spoof of the Armed Services Branch created by President Trump. The Air Force has a pending application for registration in the U.S. Still ahead, a dress rehearsal for November.
How election officials are already learning from what some are calling a massive meltdown today.
Welcome back. Polls in Fulton County are finally closed.
The County Board of Elections agreed to extend polling hours until 9 tonight due to multiple voting issues. We saw long lines all across the county. In some other places, malfunctioning machines made the voting process longer than anticipated.
An investigation is underway tonight. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger wants to know why multiple polling locations were not prepared for today's election.
It's just totally disorganized mess. They had 3 additional months to get ready for this.
You know, there were a lot of people who claimed voter suppression when Raffensperger earlier gave this comment, but we've just heard from the Fulton County Election Board, Richard Barron, putting the fault square on the shoulders of Fulton County. Raffensperger added that the County Board of Election needs in his words, a top-down cleaning house. CBS 46's Carolyn Ryan. She continues our team coverage. And Carolyn, I'm not sure if you heard Richard Barron's press conference where he's answering questions, but he admitted fault. Part of this falls on the shoulders of Fulton County.
I sure did, Sean, and that changes things quite a bit, doesn't it? They're actually in a lot of agreement here tonight. I think that's the takeaway. Let me set the scene real quick and I'll give you the background. So we're at a polling precinct here in Fulton County. 31 minutes ago, they closed one side of the gates there, no longer allowing anyone else in to vote. On this side, we see who's left inside here, still left to vote. I would say probably anywhere between, probably about 70 people in line here. There are two investigations underway, Sean. One that you mentioned, the Secretary of State's office investigating DeKalb and Fulton counties for voting mishaps today. And the other is Georgia House of Representatives, and Speaker David Ralston. He announced they too would be looking into this to see, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again, especially as we steamroll ahead into the general election in less than 5 months from now, because we did see extraordinary long lines today. We saw issues with the malfunctioning of some of the systems here set up in place, and that's really all voters care about at the end of the day. They don't care about the political back and forth or the political expediency of one side blaming another side. What we heard today from both the state and Fulton County election officials was that there were several factors at play for why we saw 4 to 5 hour wait times today across Metro Atlanta, and why many people ultimately left their precinct without casting a vote. We have new voting machines, and there was a lack of proper training of poll workers, bottom line. And one thing the Secretary of State's office wants to reassure everyone at home is that the new voting machines themselves did not malfunction. I spoke with Gabriel Sterling, who implemented the new voting system for the state. Listen to what he had to say about that.
Absolutely 100%, because what's happened is when we get those reports, we send technicians to those precincts and they get there and realize, oh, you plugged this in backwards, or oh, you didn't put this code in right. One of the biggest things we saw this morning was poll workers putting the activation cards, the little green cards they use to activate the voting machines, backwards. They were putting them backwards like, oh, it's not encoding because the chip is in the wrong way. It took a while to figure that out, and then they started to be able to function. So we're seeing those lines start to get pared down over time.
So moving forward, these machines will be used in November, and what needs to happen between now and then is more training of these county poll workers. So it appears again there's some agreement here between the state and at least Fulton County as to how we can correct these issues that we ran into today moving forward before the general election. And again, you heard both of them saying training, training, training. It needs to come down to training. Obviously, they couldn't do as much as they wanted to due to COVID-19 restrictions and other issues that we encountered. And there's going to be probably a lot of back and forth in the days and weeks to come. But these machines, according to the Secretary of State's office, are fine. They worked fine. They worked fine in early voting, and they'll be using them again. And hopefully they'll take care of it, and it'll alleviate the trouble we saw today once they get these poll workers properly trained. Live in Fulton County, Carolyn Ryan, CBS 46 News.
Thanks, Carolyn. More than half a dozen men and women hoping they are the people's choice to go against U.S. Senator David Perdue in the general election this coming November. CBS 46's Haley Mason is live with one of the potential contenders. Haley.
Hey there, we are live in Columbus, Georgia, inside the headquarters for U.S. Senate candidate Teresa Tomlinson. You may see her behind me over my left shoulder on her computer, but I want to give you a view at what she's looking at. She's on her Facebook Live watch party, and right now Judge Glenda Hatchett is one of her special guests having a watch party with viewers and voters who cannot attend in person because of this pandemic. We're socially distanced in here. It's a little quiet because they're doing a watch party, but there has been music and there have been a lot of different people joining in online. Tomlinson is running against John Ossoff and Sarah Riggs Amico, and she mentioned that Ossoff has a lot of name recognition in the Atlanta area, and she is hoping for fair a fair chance, fair representation, given all of the problems in districts that she's worked so hard to build voters in. Atlanta, Gwinnett, DeKalb County, all of those problems, she said, have been concerning today. She's been following the developments. Columbus has not been immune to some voting delays, but they certainly have not been nearly as widespread, nearly as problematic as we've seen in the metro Atlanta area. I talked to Tomlinson earlier this afternoon. She expressed some of her concerns.
It really is something that takes a cooperative team, and we have that here in Columbus. So there's some long lines. There was some confusion over a combination of precincts. People didn't have the right voting cards with them and so forth, but they've worked it out. It's just a little longer wait than we'd like to see, 2-hour waits here.
And again, we're talking 4, 5, 6-hour waits in the metro Atlanta area. We know that some polling places will stay open past 10 o'clock tonight. We'll be following these results as they began to be released from the Secretary of State's office in a very, very difficult voting day. But it takes a lot of tenacity and determination right now that we're hoping that people will be able to see it through, and we'll be following the results, bringing them to you live. For now, I'm in Columbus. Haley Mason, CBS 46 News.
Thank you, Haley. John Ossoff also vying for the chance to challenge Senator Perdue, and this is the Democrats' second run for Congress. CBS 46's Brittany Miller continues our team coverage. Brittany.
So I talked to John Ossoff earlier today. He made it very clear that he wants to defeat David Perdue in November. He'll have to get through tonight, of course. He has 6 contenders to beat. We just heard from one of them. That's including former Columbus Mayor Teresa Tomlinson and businesswoman Sarah Riggs-Amico. Now, we came to know Ossoff back in 2017 when he narrowly lost to Karen Handel in a runoff for that 6th congressional seat. It was the most expensive race in U.S. history. Ossoff saying that runoff really taught him not to listen to the, quote, haters. And during that conversation, he did touch on some of his policies and platforms, saying he wants to heavily invest in infrastructure. He wants health insurance to be your choice and is also pro-choice. Here's a little bit more.
A new Civil Rights Act that will empower the Department of Justice to hold police departments, prosecutors, and judges at all levels accountable to uniform standards of civil and constitutional rights. And a new Voting Rights Act that will ensure every single citizen of this state and this country is able to participate in our democracy without having to wait 6 hours to vote, without fear that perhaps their vote has not been counted properly.
Ossoff used words like disgusted and outraged when talking about the voting issues today in what he has called voter suppression. Now, he does not want voters to be deterred. By the way, Ossoff told me he is prepared to win a runoff in August if it comes to that. Brittany Miller, CBS 46 News.
Very frustrating. Yeah. Because you don't trust the system.
That bad, huh? I mean,
some shenanigans. I was just wondering why we were having to wait so long.
That is just one of several complaints that we heard all day today, Rick.
And the long line, Sean, just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to voter complaints. CBS 46's Melissa Stern spoke with some political experts regarding the need for a review following today's mishaps as we try to prepare for November.
What's going on today seems to be the nightmare scenario.
There are some clearly lessons to be learned here.
Some are calling it a toxic combination. Reforms after 2018 elections, new technology, plus a pandemic equals serious problems and delays at the polls across Georgia.
Do you think this is foreshadowing what's going to happen in November?
Oh, totally. This is what we're seeing today is exactly what concerns the Joe Biden campaign, to some extent the Donald Trump campaign.
There are far fewer polling sites and poll workers volunteering, causing long lines, late starts, and hours of waiting.
After this election is over, there's going to need to be a review of exactly what happened, to what degree the counties could have done a better job, to what degree the Secretary of State's office could coordinate that better.
Remember, Georgia's going to be a battleground state this year. It's a real concern for anyone, frankly, who participates in democracy.
Political experts say this kind of becomes the dress rehearsal, and hopefully the problems get fixed before the big show come November, as turnouts will be even higher.
More voters than expected want to vote in person, and we need to be prepared for that and provide them with safe, convenient options for voting in person. If this troubles voters, and it should, long lines like this shouldn't exist, and it's not the way it should work. The best thing you can do after voting is to volunteer to be a poll worker.
Melissa Stern, CBS 46 News.
You can download the free CBS 46 streaming app. We will be updating it constantly tonight as these delayed results from today's election eventually come in, and that will happen eventually. Still ahead, an accused rapist spending the night in jail following his arrest.
Plus, fired Atlanta police officers using the legal system in an attempt to get back on the force. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making CBS 46 the fastest growing news in Atlanta.
Welcome back. An accused rapist in jail tonight after turning himself in.
Eric Key faces multiple charges, including rape and kidnapping. Investigators say he pulled a woman out of her vehicle as she was leaving her Midtown condo. According to police, Key forced the woman into a vacant unit, which was being renovated, and raped her.
Clayton County investigators are working to find who shot two people, killing one of them. It happened late Monday night on Ansley Drive.
Gwinnett County Police, they arrest a man accused of slamming into three people, killing two. Jose Basolto is in the Gwinnett County Jail. Overnight, investigators say he struck three people with his car near Corona Billiards on Jimmy Carter Boulevard. Police believe an argument inside the pool hall contributed to the deadly incident.
And in the city of South Fulton, police are looking for suspects that fired a gun at officers. Police were called to the scene for two people shot when they took the gunfire. Thankfully, none of the officers was hit. The two victims were taken to the hospital with minor injuries. The two former Atlanta police officers who were fired as a result of tasing two college students have filed a lawsuit against Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms and Police Chief Erica Shields.
The incident, captured live on CBS 46, drew wide scrutiny and even caused agencies to pull out assisting APD with the protest. CBS 46's Jamie Kennedy has the details.
As the chief basically said, they are caught in a political game.
Attorney Lance LaRusso not mincing words regarding his client's former investigator Ivory Streeter and Mark Gardner, according to him, wrongful termination from APD for their conduct tasering two college students during protests last week.
And instead of saying these are two highly experienced officers, one with 1,600 hours of training, the other one with 1,800 hours of training, maybe what they did was appropriate, we immediately start out with, well, they just have to get fired.
The lawsuit claims a number of violations, including no pre-disciplinary hearing and in direct violation of the municipal code of the City of Atlanta. Chief Shields, speaking to the City Council on the same day the lawsuit was filed, reiterated her decision.
Not using force that is appropriate for the situation at hand. So the body cameras were instrumental. The mayor and I spent at least 4 hours Sunday looking just at that.
In the same meeting, Atlantans voiced their concerns, worried what might happen to the numbers of those protecting Atlanta.
worried that our city's police department will be in danger of losing officers to other departments or just through resignation.
The two officers are seeking for their jobs to be reinstated, to be back paid from the time of their dismissal, and have all benefits reinstated as well. In Atlanta, Jamie Kennedy, CBS 46 News.
New satellite video shows the massive size of tropical depression Cristobal. The picture from NASA shows the storm over parts of the southeast and right now coastal towns in Louisiana recovering from torrential rain and lots of flooding.
Now, CBS 46 Pinpoint Weather, certified Atlanta's most accurate forecast.
And believe it or not, tropical depression Cristobal is way up in the high plains. It's actually centered to the west of Chicago. It is actually the most northwestern traveling tropical system ever in the United States. Just incredible. It's actually bringing parts of Minneapolis even rain right now. Just crazy. I texted some of my friends earlier in Chicago and said, did you know a tropical depression is moving through? And they just said, well, add that to the list of 2020, right? Here in Georgia, we are actually seeing some of the leftover moisture from this tropical system. It's the reason we saw the widespread rain today. It's the reason that it feels like Florida when you walk out the door. Like you can almost cut the humidity in the air, right? It just is very, very dense outside. We're still seeing some pretty heavy rain. Lumpkin County outside of Dahlonega and northern Hall County as well. North Lake Lanier, just to the north of Gainesville, still seeing some showers. We will see this rain end slowly. Really after midnight tonight will dry out. But tropical depression Cristobal, it's going to bring a cold front through our area through the day tomorrow. Until that passes, we're in for another day very similar to today. Look, widespread thunderstorms through the afternoon. It will be muggy, it will be hot, it will be soupy outside really through the entire day. High temperatures tomorrow will be in the low to mid 80s, but with that humidity, it will feel like temperatures are in the 90s from the time you eat lunch until the time that the sun goes down. So it is going to be very muggy outside, but take a look at this. Tomorrow night, you can see right around midnight tomorrow night, the humidity drops off. That's right when the front moves through. Very dry air will work its way in. And Thursday, Friday, and even Saturday will stay on the more comfy side in terms of the humidity. Here's a look at when that front passes through. Sky is clear, sunshine returns, and by the time you wake up on Thursday, it's gonna feel and look like a completely different season outside. Temperatures will still be in the 80s, but the humidity will be much lower. We will not see any rain Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and just very isolated showers on Sunday and Monday. Overall, a very quiet week of weather after we get through tomorrow.
Okay, thanks, Ella. Still ahead, how the coronavirus is forcing people to reimagine their annual summer vacation.
And protesters have been marching in the streets across the metro and the nation. But did they combine their marching with voting, and will it make a difference? That story tonight at 11. A meltdown at the polls leaves voters waiting in the heat. The debacle delaying results.
We're tracking the big races, investigating what went wrong, and asking, will Georgia get it right in November?
Thanks for making CBS 46 the fastest growing news in Atlanta.
The coronavirus pandemic has forced many Americans to rethink their vacations, Rick, if they can even take one.
Exactly. As Chris Martinez tells us, many consumers are now actually turning to RVs so they can hit the open road safely.
At Neil's RV in Los Angeles, sales are skyrocketing at a rate rarely seen before.
Coming into Memorial Day weekend, it was just like a boom.
Sales manager Garrett Conley says in just 10 days, his team sold the amount of RVs they typically sell in 3 months, most of them to first-time buyers with coronavirus concerns.
We've had customers that realize it's time for us to own one. We don't know how long we might be doing these self-quarantining for, or how long we'll be vacationing in this way for, so I might as well own one and do it in my leisure.
The pandemic has many Americans looking for a new way to travel, and the allure of what's essentially a self-contained hotel room on wheels is leading new customers to RVs. Some are using the vehicles as a way to safely quarantine away from home. Others, like Kristen Ray, see an alternative to traditional vacation plans. Her family canceled their summer flights, opting instead for the open road.
We didn't really want to do the airlines, and we didn't really want to stay in hotels.
It's not only sales seeing a spike, but rentals too. The online RV rental site RV Share says they've seen a 1,000% increase in bookings from April to mid-May. At El Monte RV, some models have sold out entirely.
It's really going well for us at the moment, and obviously that's what people want to do. They want to go camping.
Dealers expect the demand to stay high as long as the pandemic persists. Chris Martinez, CBS News, Los Angeles.
You're watching CBS 46 News, getting results. Enable the CBS 46 skill on your Alexa device and get local news and weather updates anytime directly from CBS 46.
Gwinnett County also making sure students don't go hungry this summer. Monday, the school district launched its summer meals program. Families picked up food at Norcross High School. There are 25 pickup locations across the country. A child must be with you to get a meal. We have a complete list of the locations on our CBS 46 streaming app.
An Argentine wild water canoe racer has found a creative way to continue training for the Olympics during the coronavirus pandemic. The 28-year-old trains in his girlfriend's swimming pool. His canoe is strapped to 2 palm trees while he paddles vigorously in the water. That looks like quite a workout.
I'll pass.
Let's get a check. One last look on the forecast with Ella. It's kind of wet out there.
I don't know about that. I think I would rather run outside in this humidity than sit in a kayak in my pool and train. That's commitment right there. All right, guys, tomorrow, the humid word, it's going to be here as well. Really gross outside, scattered thunderstorms. You're going to need the umbrella, but here's the good news. This tropical weather, it all ends tomorrow night. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Beautiful sunshine and no rain. So make some outdoor plans for the back half of the week.
Okay. If I want my hair to go into a fro, I got you, girl. All right. Thanks for making CBS 46 your choice for news at 9.
My hair goes into a fro, too. And we're back with more at 11. Hopefully, we'll have some election results for you. See you then.
We, the people, are crying out for change. CBS News shines a light on what's happening today and what we can all do to build from this moment. Justice for All, a CBS News special with Gayle King, coming up on CBS.
The Army's mission is any adversary, anywhere, anytime.
Our nation is threatened by this invisible enemy, and we will defeat it.
What do you want folks to take away from this video?
I feel like it's a celebration of the human spirit.
Anytime you can put a human face and tell their story, it makes such a difference.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
I filed an amended complaint that charges former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin with murder in the second degree for the death of George Floyd.
Am I next? Am I next?
I feel like this is the most united any of us have felt maybe our entire lives.
Let's take a moment of silence.
Every day that we're out here is a move towards change.
We should not kid ourselves to believe that Floyd's death is any more horrific than the deaths we saw before. America is just in a different place.
This is the latest in a series of protests around the city.
I believe there's a chance for us to do something different than we've done each and every time we've come to a place like this.
And to the republic for which it stands.
The reason we could never be who we wanted and dreamed of being is you kept your knee on our neck.
Amadou Diallo was killed in a fusillade of 41 police bullets.
And it turns out he was unarmed. He was reaching for a wallet.
Amadou was this young, generous person who cannot even harm someone.
In the notorious videotape beating of a black motorist that
Final
stunned the
moments of
nation
Ahmaud
for years.
Arbery's life.
Get out! Wow. Now!
10 years ago, we lost our son, and it's heartbreaking to see that nothing has changed.
One nation under God, indivisible.
We all have these biases in us, but we have to be able to train our officers to not fall into that trap.
If any good-hearted person think we're going to walk in the room and flip on a switch and all of this is going to go away, they're setting themselves up for failure. You need a paradigm shift in policing.
Optimism in the face of reality is a revolutionary act.
America, it is time for a change. Even if it shall begin with more protests, no justice, no peace.
Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening to you. I'm Gail King. The promise of justice for all is based on a revolutionary American idea that the law should protect everyone equally. But justice for all is still an unfulfilled promise because of racism and bigotry that stands in the way of a more perfect union. In few places is that reach wider than between people of color and the police. Now the nation is engaged in a very difficult conversation on race, sparked by a series of events that began in February. By now, we all know the stories. Ahmaud Arbery was jogging near his Georgia neighborhood when chased by 3 white men who believed that he had been trespassing. He was shot and killed. March, Kentucky. Breonna Taylor, an EMT, died moments after police used a battering ram to break into her own apartment to search for drugs. Her boyfriend shot at who he believed were intruders. Police fired back and killed Taylor. No drugs were found there. In April, a CDC review found Black Americans, who made up 18% of the population they studied, represented a third of hospitalizations for COVID-19. By May, the U.S. Labor Department reported that 1 in 6 Black workers were laid off as the economy was locked down. And on Memorial Day, right here in New York City, in Central Park, a white woman had a minor dispute with a Black man who was bird watching. Video of her call to police saying she felt threatened went viral. Hours later in Minneapolis, George Floyd, say his name, was killed by police. The horrific image, and horrific is the word, of a white cop's knee on a Black man's neck turned a tinderbox into a bonfire. Today, funeral services were held for George Floyd in his hometown of Houston, Texas. A horse-drawn carriage brought Floyd's casket to the cemetery where he was buried next to his mother. In street protests that are going on right now as we speak here in New York City and around kitchen tables, many are asking this question: how do we achieve justice for all? Well, we're going to examine that tonight, and we begin with CBS News correspondent Jeff Pegues. He's in Minneapolis.
The Twin Cities, where 2 men and 2 worlds collided. Minneapolis is consistently ranked one of the most livable cities in the country. But underneath what was branded as Minnesota nice, there was tension. A city divided along racial lines with conflicts between the men and women in blue and communities of color. Are they protecting and serving in this neighborhood?
No.
Former Ohio State basketball player P.J. Hill was born and raised here.
Like Dr. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
He says George Floyd's murder is why he is now an activist. Have you been stopped by police personally?
Yes.
How many times?
Countless. I can't even count.
African Americans make up only 20% of the population, yet they account for nearly 60% of use of force incidents at the hands of police.
No justice, no peace.
George Floyd's death transformed smoldering frustration into a burning fury. The police precinct where the 4 officers worked was consumed, as was the nightclub where Floyd once worked security. We met owner Maya Santamaria outside what was left.
So this is the epicenter of the Latino community.
How would you describe your interactions with him personally?
He was that guy that you walk in and he had this big smile and he would just call me boss lady. He'd say, "How you doing, boss lady? How are you tonight?"
Derek Chauvin was also working at the Latin Club when off duty. He worked outside. Co-worker David Pinney told us Floyd and Chauvin had a history.
What kind of history?
They bumped heads.
How?
And it has a lot to do with Derek being extremely aggressive within the club with some of the patrons, which was an issue.
Is there any doubt in your mind that Derek Chauvin knew George Floyd?
No, he knew him.
How well did he know him?
I'd say pretty well.
Floyd, 6'4" and 223 pounds, was known affectionately as Big Floyd. He grew up in one of Houston's poorest and most segregated neighborhoods. By all accounts, he was a happy kid. He played football. That's him, number 88, catching the pass. And he was an accomplished basketball player.
He was a monster on the court, but in life, in general, talking to people, a gentle giant.
Philonis Floyd says his older brother George was always the center of attention.
Man, when I tell you, he lights up a room, man.
Oh, is that right?
Big guy, friendly guy. Tell you anything you want to know.
Floyd moved to Minneapolis 5 years ago for a change of scenery and to be closer to some of his friends. Derek Chauvin grew up just outside the Twin Cities and trained as a cook. He served 2 stints in the U.S. Army before settling in Oakdale, a mostly white suburb. He joined the Minneapolis Police Department 19 years ago. During that time, he was involved in at least 2 shootings, including one fatal incident in 2006 with a man who allegedly had a gun. Chauvin was exonerated in both cases. Police records show 17 complaints against him, but he was cleared in 16 of the cases. He also received 2 letters of reprimand. None of it derailed his career. Do you think Derek had a problem with black people?
I think he was afraid and intimidated.
320, we're code 4.
On Memorial Day, the police were sent to this corner store after a customer passed a phony $20 bill to pay for cigarettes. That customer was allegedly George Floyd. According to the criminal complaint, officers on the scene pulled Floyd out of his Mercedes SUV, handcuffed him, and walked him to the sidewalk. He can be seen in this video sitting calmly on the ground. A few minutes later, Officer Derek Chauvin arrives on the scene. But at that point, there is a gap in the video until we see Floyd on the ground.
I will.
And that fatal knee pressed into Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
I gave.
Were you surprised when you saw Officer Chauvin pressing his knee into George Floyd's neck?
I was not surprised when I initially saw his knee on his neck, to be honest.
Why not?